Jon Snow stood upon the battlements of Winterfell, breathing in the chill that clung to the early morning air. Dawn had scarcely broken, the eastern sky was stained with the faintest flush of gold. The wind carried the scent of distant pine and crisp snow, and though spring should have gentled the cold by now, the north guarded its chills as fiercely as the Starks guarded their secrets. Jon stared across the courtyard to where the future seemed to wait, uncertain, a tapestry of expectations left behind after the wars that had ravaged these lands. He had changed since that first day he'd arrived at Winterfell as a boy, unknowing of his heritage. He had changed even more since the day he learned the truth of his parentage, Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, heir to the Iron Throne. Yet he was still Jon Snow in his own mind, shaped by Ned Stark's unwavering sense of honor and by the cold vigilance of the North. The knowledge that he carried the blood of dragons made him neither jubilant nor prideful. All it brought was another burden, more guilt for the havoc wrought in the name of claims and crowns. Truth and destiny bound him in ways he had never wished for. On the ramparts nearby, Ghost paced, his red eyes scanning the horizon. The dire wolf was uneasy, picking up the tension that ran like an undercurrent through Winterfell in those final days before a decision that would alter the course of history. Gendry Baratheon was due to arrive that morning. It had been 2 moons since Jon had last seen the man, and in that time, Gendry had secured the Stormlands under his own banner. A legitimized son of Robert Baratheon, Gendry had proven himself more than just a blacksmith's apprentice with a storied name. He had become a leader in his own right, recognized by lords eager to see stability return to Westeros. Jon's mind drifted to the uncertain alliances that had blossomed from the ashes left by the wars. Daenerys Targaryen was gone, her unsullied had departed across the narrow sea, and though her abrupt fall had shaken the realm, it had also left a power vacuum. Bran Stark had ascended to a seat in King's Landing by the will of the Great Council, but the young king, uncanny and distant, had beckoned Jon to consider helping shape Westeros's future in another way. They had agreed that a strong alliance might serve as a pillar of stability, a bridge between the North and the rest of the continent that wouldn't rely on dragons or the idea of a single Iron Throne so many had died to claim. As Gendry rose in influence, it became clear that a union of houses Baratheon and Stark, under the guidance of 2 men who understood the weight of bastardy and the cost of war, might reshape the realm. Footsteps echoed behind Jon. He turned to find Sansa, cloaked in wolf's fur, her hands folded as she approached. Though Winterfell was rightfully hers to rule, she had been one of the first to encourage a bond with Gendry. She had seen how the people of the North responded to Jon, how the Stormlanders rallied to Gendry, drawn by echoes of Robert's memory. It was Sansa who had, in careful whispers behind closed doors, reminded her brother, her cousin, truth be told, of the necessity for a strong alliance. "He'll be here soon," she said, nodding to the winter sky, already turning pale with daylight. "Are you certain you wish to make this offer to him so soon? You've barely had time to settle your own heart after everything that's happened." Jon exhaled, his breath fleeting before him in a cold wisp. "No choice ever feels easy, especially not in the aftermath of war. If I've learned anything, it's that I must do what I can to protect the realm, protect our family. Gendry has the strength of the Stormlands behind him, and the king trusts him. The people trust him." Sansa stepped closer, resting her gloved hands atop the stone wall. "The North is wary of outsiders, you know this. But Gendry is not truly an outsider if his house is tied to ours. The Baratheons were once kin to the Targaryens, but Gendry is also a man shaped by hardships that the small folk know well. And there's a certain poetry in it, Stark and Baratheon, a union that might do what Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon once hoped to do, bring the realm peace. But are you willing to accept more titles? More burdens?" Jon felt the ache behind his eyes that came with too many sleepless nights. A swirl of memories haunted him, the undead swarming across the fields, the merciless shrieks of wights, the fiery breath of dragons scorching the darkness. Then the recollection of King's Landing, the bells that tolled in vain, and Daenerys' final fall. He wanted none of it, the war, the burden, the guilt. Yet he wanted to ensure no more innocents died for the ambitions of those who refused to learn from history. "I'm willing to try," he said quietly. "We owe it to the living." Sansa gave him a subtle smile, then nodded, letting the silence speak for her for a moment. She touched his arm in a sign of support. They stood that way until horns sounded at the gate, heralding the arrival of a group on horseback. Gendry had come at last. Jon descended from the ramparts, Ghost padding silently after him. He passed through the courtyard, where men and women sparred with wooden swords, new recruits training in the ways of the North. They paused to watch as the procession arrived. Gendry had with him a modest entourage, most of them Stormlanders, some of them knights who had served under Robert's old banner, now sworn anew to Gendry. Their sigils gleamed, the black stag on gold a stark reminder of the lion he carried. What struck Jon as Gendry dismounted was not the banner but the expression on Gendry's face. The young Baratheon looked more certain than Jon remembered. Gone was the wide-eyed blacksmith's apprentice. His jaw was set, his gaze keen with resolve. He approached Jon with a modest grin that cut through the tension of the moment. "Jon," he greeted, clapping Jon's arm. "It's good to see you. I'm glad it's not snowing." His jest elicited a grin from Jon, who was relieved to find Gendry's humor intact. "You're lucky. Winterfell's always ready to remind us of winter no matter the season." Gendry's breath fogged as he laughed. "A small price to pay for your hospitality." They slipped into a calm conversation discussing how the Stormlands had been faring, how the small folk had responded to Gendry's rule, the bandits and outlaws that still prowled the roads in the wake of war. It felt almost normal even as Sansa came forward with a graceful nod to welcome Gendry formally to Winterfell. The lords and retainers dispersed soon after, guided to their quarters by stewards. Sansa excused herself to attend to matters of provisioning, leaving Jon and Gendry alone near a corner of the courtyard where a weirwood arch cast flickering shadows in the cold morning light. Ghost lingered but was calm around Gendry, having recognized him as no threat. "It's not that I hate traveling," Gendry said, eyeing the ancient stone of the courtyard, "but I always forget how far the north stretches. Seems every time I come, it's an endless expanse of white." Jon studied him for a moment. "You must be used to storms and sea winds. The cold is different, but not without its own unpredictability. I've seen snowstorms blow in from nowhere, burying roads in an hour. And the roads home are muddy and thick with humidity," Gendry added, crossing his arms over his chest. "Both lands have their challenges. But how are you, Jon?" Sansa said in her Raven that you had something important to discuss. Jon shifted, aware of how his next words might define both their futures. "It's not just me," he admitted. "Bran, as king, has been speaking with the Lords Paramount, trying to decide how best to keep the peace. Nobody wants another war, especially not one sparked by rival claims or old grievances. I'm sure you've heard the chatter among some who'd still see the Iron Throne contested. The realm is tired, Gendry. The men who march under your banner need a leader who can show them that forging alliances is better than forging swords." "Go on," Gendry said, curiosity tightening his voice. Jon glanced around at the courtyard, Winterfell's heart, a place that always made him feel small and untested, no matter what he had survived. "The North has declared for House Stark, and I have the loyalty of many free folk beyond the wall. You have the Stormlands behind you, legitimized by royal decree. If we combine our leadership, if we stand as a unified force, Stark and Baratheon, there's a chance we can quell any murmuring of rebellion before it starts. The small folk will see two houses once allied under King Robert and my father's generation, now fully joined, a new line that's half wolf and half stag. It might be enough to dissuade any would-be usurpers." Gendry's expression darkened a shade. He was no fool. He knew this was the talk of politics and crowns, the same game that had consumed his father. "You're asking me to join with the North? But how exactly? As a sworn ally?" He paused, his brow furrowing. "Or are you talking about something more permanent?" Jon hesitated, feeling the weight of everything left unsaid, the Targaryen part of him he rarely wanted to acknowledge, the vow to protect his family, the guilt of being forced into these roles time and again. "I'm talking about forging a new house that unites both. King Bran is encouraging it. Sansa believes it wise. Tyrion supports it." He drew in a slow breath. "With Targaryen claims, Stark loyalties, and Baratheon strength, we might establish a new ruling line that's more stable than anything that came before." There was a silence. Gendry, who had once been so direct, looked uncertain. "I never asked for a crown or half a kingdom," he said. "All I wanted was to do right by the people who believed in me. I know the Stormlands can be rough. The lords were hungry for leadership after my father's brothers died. I stepped up because someone had to, and it felt like the right thing to do. But are you sure we can hold it together if we do this?" Jon nodded slowly. "We have to try. The realm needs a symbol of unity. The Targaryen name alone won't do. The Starks are too distant from the southern lords to wield full influence. Your father was popular among the small folk once, and if you continue in the same spirit, plus the alliances the North can bring, we might finally break the cycle of war and vengeance. And there's more to it. People see in us a reflection of Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon, but we can do better. We must do better." Gendry pressed his lips together, the calluses on his hands a testament to the simpler life he had once led. The swirl of politics sometimes clashed with his sense of practicality. But in Jon's eyes, he saw someone who wanted no more bloodshed. "All right," he said. "I'll hear more." But I won't lie, Jon, I'm not entirely sure how we fuse two great houses. Marriage alliances? Some vow in front of the realm. Jon blinked at the mention of marriage. He and Gendry were both unmarried, but that was not the typical path of uniting houses if both leaders were men. It doesn't have to be us marrying. The realm is large. There are alliances formed through a broader weaving of loyalties, joint rulership, or perhaps forging a new seat of power that merges the best of both houses. But let's see what Sansa thinks. She understands the game better than most. She's always been able to see the angles that elude me. Gendry let out a hearty laugh, a spark of relief in it. And me, he said. If there's a game of subtlety, I'd best leave it to those sharper than a blacksmith's hammer. They shared a momentary grin, a kind of kinship that had been forged during the night against the dead and the subsequent days of heartbreak. Both had emerged from war with scars, literal and otherwise. Perhaps that was precisely why a union of their leadership might work. The people respected scars, recognized truth in men who had bled beside them. They parted ways in the courtyard, each to see to the many tasks that came with running their respective spheres of influence. Gendry oversaw the forging of new armor for his knights. He had insisted on doing part of the work himself. Jon walked the walls of Winterfell, meeting guards, listening to the concerns of traveling merchants who had come north to sell grain. The day slipped by, and as dusk approached, torches were lit in the great hall, beckoning all to gather for a feast of modest fare. The feast was nothing so grand as those from the days before the wars, but a warmth pervaded it. Long tables lined the hall, Winterfell guards and Stormlander knights mingling. Mead and ale flowed, trenchers of steaming stew, fresh bread, and roasted vegetables were shared among the guests. Conversation hummed. The crisp air outside only made the hearths glow more welcome. At the high table sat Jon, Sansa, Gendry, and a select few advisors. Arya was absent, off on her ventures across the seas, exploring new horizons. Bran was in King's Landing, leaving Winterfell under Sansa's watchful governance. Yet there was laughter here, the ghosts of war momentarily banished. Jon took note of the weathered but content expressions among the men. After so much loss, a single evening of cheer was a balm. Sansa, regal in her bearing, raised her cup for a toast. To Lord Gendry Baratheon, she declared. May our halls forever welcome him and his loyal knights. May we remember old friendships and forge new ones that weather all storms. Gendry stood and bowed his head. He responded with a toast of his own, voice resonant in the hall. My thanks to Lady Sansa Stark, Warden of the North, and to Jon Snow, who has ever proven himself loyal to what is right beyond houses and crowns. May the storms of the south and the snows of the north come together in peace, for the sake of every soul under the same sky. A hearty cheer rose, cups clinked. Jon couldn't help but feel a surge of cautious optimism. Perhaps unity was possible. Perhaps they were not doomed to repeat the sins of the past. When the feast grew quieter, Sansa led Gendry and Jon to a side chamber where a small hearth crackled. A jug of spiced wine waited on a sturdy oak table along with a plate of honey cakes. It was a cozy, private alcove for the three to speak freely. Sansa dismissed the guards at the door, leaving only the three of them, Stark, and Baratheon. Sansa poured the spiced wine, handing each man a warm clay cup. We should speak plainly, she said, her voice low but resolute. Winterfell is strong, but the north is weary. The Stormlands are loyal to you, Gendry, but your hold is new. We have an opportunity to shape Westeros in a way that avoids endless bloodshed. Gendry set his cup down, leaning forward in his chair. Jon told me your intentions, but the details are not all set. Are we suggesting a co-rulership? A formal oath? Some new seat of power that's shared? Sansa considered. Bran holds the throne in King's Landing, and he rules with as gentle a hand as he can manage. The lords accept him because he was chosen by their council, not simply by birth. Yet many in the realm suspect we could revert to the old ways. Some question the Targaryen influence that still lingers in King's Landing, or they question the legitimacy of a boy who did not fight in the wars. Still others whisper about you, Jon, calling you the rightful Targaryen heir, though we all know how you feel about that. Jon closed his eyes, recalling the burdens of that claim. I gave up any claim to the throne. I don't want it. That hasn't stopped others from trying to use you as a figurehead for their ambitions, Sansa retorted gently, her gaze flicking between Jon and Gendry. But what if we cut the talk of Targaryen claims out entirely, making it clear that House Baratheon and House Stark stand at the forefront of the realm, side by side? We could form what is essentially a new dynasty, binding the North and the Stormlands in perpetual alliance. The Targaryen name fades away naturally, letting Jon stand as a Stark, you as a Baratheon, both recognized by the king in King's Landing. Gendry tapped a finger on the table, thinking. That might help keep certain factions from stirring up Targaryen loyalists or those who want to dethrone Bran in your favor. But how do we seal it? Just an oath might not be enough. A year ago, oaths were broken all over the realm. Sansa's lips curved into a patient smile. We might craft a new vow of kinship. If the two of you officially adopt an overlapping sigil, some merging of the wolf and the stag, it would signal to the realm that you stand as one. No one could easily drive a wedge between you, not if you both vow to protect each other's lands and people as if your own. It would be akin to how Robert Baratheon once married Cersei Lannister to fuse alliances, only we can do it without a forced marriage. We do it by forging brotherhood and unity, a house that stands above petty divisions. Let it be House Baratheon Stark in name. A new banner to mark this new beginning. Gendry's dark brows rose slightly at the suggestion. A single house? Would that not confuse some? And which seat do we call home? Sansa inclined her head. Winterfell remains the seat of the north. Storm's End remains the seat of the Stormlands. We have 2 seats, 2 strongholds, but the lords and small folk will understand that your alliance is absolute. 2 men leading together, with King Bran acknowledging that the combined house is second only to the crown. That means neither of you is overshadowed by the other. Each is warden of his territory, warden of the north, warden of the Stormlands, but you share a banner, a new line recognized by royal decree. It might sound radical, but it could be the compromise that secures peace. Jon listened, feeling a surge of relief that Sansa had found a path that did not require him to claim the Targaryen name or upend the monarchy that Bran led. You want to call it House Baratheon Stark, he said, almost tasting the foreign concept. And if either of us has heirs in the future. Sansa's expression was kind but firm. They would bear that name. If you marry, or if Gendry marries, any child produced would inherit that combined legacy. We tie the future of the North and the Stormlands together. You will each keep your existing seat, but both seats belong under the banner of Baratheon Stark. It's unconventional, but it might be precisely what this realm needs, a symbol that we don't have to follow the same old ways and watch them fail us again. Gendry looked from one Stark to the other. Slowly, a thoughtful look settled on his face. It could work, he said, but the realm might balk at such a new idea. That's why we enact it with the king's blessing, Sansa replied. Bran will lend it legitimacy. The lords who whisper for war will see they have no chance if the North and Stormlands stand united, with the rest of the realm, Riverlands, Vale, Reach willing to support a peaceful future. If the new house stands for mercy, trade, protection of the small folk, we might avert another tragedy. Jon set his cup aside. Then let's do it. Let us pledge ourselves to forging a new future. If you'll stand with me, Gendry, I'll stand with you. Our families, your unborn children and mine, should we have them, will bear the name Baratheon Stark. We'll share the burden of leadership not as king and subject but as brothers in arms. Gendry let out a breath. Then you have my word. I don't know half of what to do in these matters, but if forging a new house will protect the realm, I'm with you. Sansa's grin broke free, and for the briefest moment, he looked like the girl Jon remembered, a spark of hope in her eyes. Then we have a plan. We'll draw up official documents, send ravens to the major lords. We'll invite them here to witness the vow. The realm can see that we've chosen peace, that the promise of the Stark wolf and Baratheon stag together transcends the greed and chaos of the past. That night, Jon found sleep elusive. He paced in his chamber, remembering the words spoken. A new house. A new dynasty. For a man who had lived a life as a bastard, uncertain of his place, the idea felt daunting. Yet he thought of the thousands who had died for one crown or another, the children left without parents, the families forced to bury loved ones after the wars. If this new idea could spare future generations from such heartbreak, it was worth any personal hesitation. He closed his eyes, letting the dim glow of the fire lull him. Ghostos by the hearth, ears twitching. Jon felt a solemn vow settle into his bones. He would not let history repeat itself. Over the next fortnight, Winterfell buzzed with preparations. Scribes wrote endless letters, invitations to lords from Dorne to the Iron Islands, beckoning them to witness the formal creation of this union. Few refused, many were curious, others cautious, but a chance to see what the North was plotting was too tempting to pass. Even the Vale and the Reach, who had come to trust Sansa, sent their representatives. One brisk morning, as ravens fluttered off with letters tied to their legs, Gendry walked beside Jon through the castle's corridors. The blacksmith in Gendry had reawakened, and he spoke animatedly of forging a new sigil that combined the dire wolf and the stag. He described how the direwolf's head might be placed over a shield bearing the golden stag, or how their shapes might merge into one symmetrical design. Jon listened with quiet patience, appreciating the creative spark that warmed Gendry's eyes. When they crossed the yard, they paused at the training grounds where a handful of recruits sparred. A tall young man, newly arrived from the Vale, was practicing with a blunted sword. Gendry commented on the technique, his eye for movement keen. Jon was struck by how natural Gendry seemed in this environment, leading men, offering practical advice without the stifling arrogance that plagued many lords. The Stormlanders respected him because he was one of them in spirit, a man who had sweated in the forge, fought with a warhammer, survived the war against the dead. It reminded Jon of Ned Stark's quiet dignity, leadership earned through honor rather than forced by ambition. Perhaps that was why fate seemed to guide them to this new path. Word arrived that King Bran had dispatched Tyrion Lannister as his hand to attend the vows ceremony along with Ser Brienne of Tarth and several others of the King's Guard. News spread that Yara Greyjoy would attend, representing the Iron Islands, and that a delegation from Dorne was en route. Samwell Tarly was also expected, traveling from the Citadel to witness history. A hush of anticipation filled Winterfell as the day approached. Tapestries bearing the Stark sigil were hung, and new banners combining the wolf and the stag were quietly prepared. Scribes practiced the official vow that Jon and Gendry would each recite. It was not a wedding vow, rather, a vow of perpetual brotherhood, a promise to defend each other's lands, to put aside claims that might sow discord. On the eve of the ceremony, Tyrion arrived, stepping down from a carriage with a wry grin. "It seems you Northerners found a new way to surprise us all," he said to Jon, offering a polite bow before looking up at the castle walls. "I'm impressed by your boldness. Are you sure the realm is ready for such a radical notion?" Jon sighed. "If they aren't ready, we'll have to show them why it's necessary." Tyrion nodded, then turned to Gendry. "And you, Lord Baratheon, forging your own path. I suppose you have blacksmith's hands, so forging should come naturally." Gendry laughed, clapping Tyrion's shoulder. "Any word from the king? His grace awaits final confirmation of your vow. Once done, he'll issue a proclamation in King's Landing, legitimizing House Baratheon Stark," Tyrion said. "It's still a mouthful, but I hear it has a nice ring to it, combining the unstoppable force of the stag with the unyielding presence of the wolf. Perhaps it's a match made in the seven heavens." That night, the castle was filled with visiting lords and ladies. Tents spilled into the courtyard, flickering with torchlight. Fires crackled, and the smell of roasted meats mingled with the crisp northern air. Jon found a brief moment of solitude in the Godswood, kneeling at the base of the ancient heart tree. The red leaves rustled overhead, a gentle hiss that reminded him of days gone by. He couldn't help but speak softly, as if to the old gods themselves. "Give me strength to do what is right," he murmured, "and keep me true to the people who depend on me." The old gods answered with only the sigh of the wind. Yet Jon felt calmer afterward, as though the centuries-old weirwood recognized his plea. In the morning, a cold sun dawned over Winterfell, bright enough to reflect on the fresh layer of frost covering the castle walls. Servants prepared the main courtyard for the ceremony, arranging benches and torches for warmth. Lords and ladies filed in, wearing their cloaks and finery, the swirl of southern silks mixing with northern furs. Tyrion stood to one side with Sansa, conversing quietly. Brienne of Tarth, imposing in gleaming armor, kept watch with an expression of solemn pride. Jon and Gendry stood at the center. Ghost padded near Jon, calm yet watchful. Gendry wore dark leathers accented by a simple golden brooch of the stag, a nod to his heritage. Jon wore somber black and gray, the Stark colors. Both men wore no crowns. This was not a coronation, but a vow. A hush settled over the gathered crowd. The only sounds were the soft flutters of cloaks and the distant caw of a raven. Sansa stepped forward, her red hair catching the sunlight, a solemn expression on her face. She raised her hands for attention, and all eyes fell upon her. "Honored guests, we gather on this day to witness the forging of a new house. For too long, the realm has suffered under the weight of war, treachery, and shattered vows. Today, Lord Gendry Baratheon, recognized son of Robert Baratheon, and Jon Snow, raised as a Stark of Winterfell, will each make a pledge that binds the Stormlands and the North in unbreakable unity. By the grace of King Bran the Broken, the word of Tyrion Lannister as Hand of the King, and with the witness of lords and ladies from across Westeros, we declare our intent to protect the peace and prosperity of the realm." Tyrion nodded, stepping forward to produce a parchment sealed with the royal stamp. "The king has granted us this decree. By it, once these vows are spoken and recognized, a new banner shall be raised, the banner of House Baratheon Stark, symbolizing the bond of stag and wolf. Henceforth, these two men will be recognized as co-founders of this house, each the liege lord of his territory, sworn to come to the other's aid. Neither shall claim the Iron Throne, for that seat belongs to the king by decree of the Great Council and the realm. In return, the realm acknowledges them as pillars of stability." He extended a hand to Gendry. "Lord Baratheon, do you vow to protect the North as though it were your own land, to come to its aid in times of strife, to respect its customs and defend its people?" Gendry's voice was steady. "I vow it before gods old and new. Winterfell and its lords shall have no greater ally than Gendry Baratheon." Tyrion turned to Jon. "Lord Snow of House Stark, do you vow to protect the Stormlands as though it were your own land, to come to its aid, to respect its customs and defend its people?" Jon inclined his head, heart hammering in his chest. "I vow it before gods old and new. Storm's End and its lords shall have no greater ally than Jon Snow raised Stark. And do you each vow to set aside all claims that might divide you, to uphold this new house, to lead with honor, compassion, and justice so far as you are able?" Tyrion asked, looking between them. They responded in unison. "We do." Tyrion then nodded to Sansa, who brought forth a folded banner. She unfurled it for the crowd to see, a direwolf's head in gray facing a black stag on a field that mixed the colors of both houses. The design, which Gendry himself had helped conceive, was met with scattered applause and some murmured exclamation. Tyrion called out, "Then by the power granted to me as Hand of the King, I declare House Baratheon Stark formally recognized by the crown. May they defend their lands with the courage of the wolf and the strength of the stag." A thunderous cheer swept through the courtyard, echoing against the walls. Lords and ladies applauded, albeit some more reserved than others. Gendry turned to Jon, offering him his hand. They clasped each other's forearms in a gesture that was equal parts brotherhood and alliance. Relief washed over Jon as he gazed at the men and women gathered. Brienne of Tarth, arms crossed, gave a small nod of approval. Yara Greyjoy, with a half-smirk, inclined her head in a gesture of acceptance. The various representatives from other regions stirred, talking amongst themselves with subdued interest. Just then, a horn blew from beyond the gates. A rider galloped in, one of the scouts posted on the road. The man slid from his horse, rushed forward, breathing hard. "Bandits, my lord," he managed, looking from Jon to Gendry. "A large band of them harrying travelers on the King's Road, not 2 leagues from here. They've ambushed a small caravan. Possibly they're men left over from the war or Sellswords turned outlaws." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The timing could not have been worse. Yet Jon felt that glint of determination rise in him. This was precisely why they had formed this alliance, to bring peace and security to the realm. He glanced at Gendry, who gave him a curt nod. They each strode forward, calling on men to prepare horses. In a matter of minutes, Jon Snow, Gendry Baratheon, Brienne of Tarth, and a contingent of knights and guards rode out from Winterfell's gates. The onlookers who had just moments before witnessed a ceremony of unity now saw that unity in action as northern riders formed ranks alongside Stormlander knights. The scene on the King's Road was brutal, a supply wagon overturned, a pair of frightened merchants pinned behind it, an arrow lodged in one man's shoulder. The bandits, numbering around a dozen, milled about with a confidence born of desperation. Their leader wore mismatched armor, a battered breastplate, and a patchy beard. Jon guided his horse forward, Ghost running at his side. Gendry did the same, brandishing a warhammer that Robert Baratheon himself might have admired. The bandits spotted them, but instead of fleeing, they bellowed a challenge, fueled by either foolish courage or hopelessness. They rushed the group, weapons raised. Jon felt a surge of adrenaline as he drew Longclaw. He remembered the terror of facing the dead, the unstoppable tide of whites. In comparison, mortal bandits felt almost manageable. He slid from his horse in one fluid motion, meeting the closest outlaw with a parry. Gendry roared, bringing his hammer down on another attacker, the impact ringing through the crisp air. Brienne cut a path through the fray with effortless precision. The northern guards and Stormlander knights fanned out, corralling the bandits, who realized too late they were vastly outmatched. Within minutes, the outlaws were disarmed, 1 or 2 lying wounded on the roadside. The leader spat blood, gazing up at Jon with hateful eyes. "Dogs of the crown," he muttered, wincing as Brienne pressed a blade to his throat to keep him still. "There's no law left in this land." We do what we must to survive. Jon stepped forward. What you do is rob and kill innocents. That ends here. There was a tense pause, the aftermath of a swift battle. Gendry, breathing hard, looked at Jon, uncertain. They had subdued these men, but the question now was justice. In the old days, Ned Stark might have taken a man's head for banditry. Robert Baratheon might have strung them up in the nearest tree. But this was a new age, or so they hoped. Jon nodded to Gendry, and the new forging of House Baratheon Stark found its first test. We will not kill them out of hand, Jon said, turning to the bandits. We'll take them back to Winterfell. They will stand trial before the assembled lords. If found guilty, they will face the rightful punishment. But if they wish to earn a second chance, to serve rather than destroy, we will consider it. The bandits looked too beaten and desperate to protest. Some had the hollow stare of men who had lost all hope. Others showed fierce defiance, but they kept silent. Tying their hands, the knights secured them to horses for the ride back. The wounded merchants were helped onto a cart where a maester's apprentice could tend their wounds once they reached Winterfell. Gendry wiped sweat from his brow. Do you think the lords gathered will complain we were too merciful? He asked Jon quietly. Jon sheathed Longclaw. Some might. Others might see reason in it. If we're to lead, we can't just kill every outlaw we come across. We need to show the realm we stand for justice, not cruelty. If they're truly irredeemable, their fates will be sealed, but we should at least follow the rule of law. Gendry smiled faintly, though his eyes were still aflame with the rush of combat. I suppose there's no forging peace without forging a fair system too. Trial it is. Let's get them back. They returned to Winterfell's gates, the small caravan rescued, the bandits bound. The gathered lords and ladies who had stayed behind watched with guarded interest. Perhaps some had hoped for a glorious, bloody example to be made. Instead, they saw the newcomers demonstrate discipline, a refusal to spill more blood than necessary. Tyrion's gaze held approval, a small half-smile lifting his scarred face. Sansa, standing with her cloak drawn tight, merely looked relieved that the threat had been managed without further tragedy. That evening, the bandits were placed under guard. Scribes prepared to record the trial. Jon and Gendry, exhausted yet determined, gave statements about the ambush. The merchants, trembling but alive, confirmed the bandits' crime. Some of the outlaws admitted guilt readily, eyes downcast as though expecting a swift execution. Others spat curses, defiant to the last. In the end, half were sentenced to serve in the Night's Watch. Though it was smaller now, it still existed at the edges of the realm, guarding the far north. The rest, those who had murdered or shown no remorse, would face the block. Even in this new age, justice demanded a price for their crimes. Jon's heart felt heavy, but he accepted the necessity. He performed the executions himself with Longclaw, remembering Ned Stark's words, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Later that night, the halls of Winterfell were quieter, the visitors subdued by the day's events. Though it was not a grand celebration, there was a sense of reassurance in the corridors. House Baratheon Stark had faced its first test of leadership and had acted decisively yet justly. Some guests left the next morning, bearing stories of the vow and the demonstration of unity. Others lingered, curious to see how this new alliance would shape the future. A few days later, Sansa hosted a final gathering, smaller than the ceremony, in the Great Hall. Jon and Gendry stood near the dais as she addressed the visiting dignitaries who still remained. We have shown that though the name Baratheon Stark is new, our resolve is not, she said. The North shall stand beside the Stormlands, not merely as allies but as one house. We welcome friends from every corner of the realm. If you would trade with us, we will open our roads. If you need aid, we will rally. But to any who wish to raise arms in rebellion, know that our union is strong. We will protect our people. Gendry, an unpolished but earnest speaker, added a few words about rebuilding. He invited skilled tradesmen to the Stormlands to help in repairs, offered fair wages, and promised that House Baratheon Stark would invest in the future of its lands. Jon simply said, "We've known enough death. Let this new age be marked by collaboration, not conquest." The next morning, the departing lords lined up to bid farewell. Some left with smiles, praising the hospitality. Others remained impassive, their faces unreadable. But there was no open dissent. Sansa, Tyrion, Brienne, and a handful of others stayed behind a while longer, finalizing the official documents that would be dispatched to King Bran. Tyrion was to return to King's Landing with Brienne and Yara Greyjoy. Before leaving, Tyrion sought out Jon near the castle's entrance. "I expect there will be rumors," the dwarf said. "Some will say you have your eyes on the throne. Others will worry about two great houses becoming too powerful. But as long as you keep acting with fairness, I believe you can win over hearts and minds." Jon gazed down at Tyrion, remembering how many times the man's counsel had helped him. "I have no intention of usurping Bran. Tyrion's voice was gentle. I know, but rumors can be more dangerous than swords. Keep your wits about you. And never forget the realm is watching. They clasped arms in farewell. After the carriage departed, Jon stood near the gate, gazing at the receding shapes. Gendry approached, the new banner of House Baratheon Stark folded under his arm. It's official now, Gendry said, a note of pride in his voice. We're recognized by the king, and soon every corner of Westeros will know. Jon nodded. It feels strange, though. I've spent my life never truly belonging. Now, I belong to two houses at once, or perhaps a single house that merges both. We carry a responsibility that I never asked for. Nor did I, Gendry agreed, gripping the rolled banner. But maybe that's why we're the right ones for it. We're not doing this because we crave power. We just want to make sure no one else suffers like we all did. Jon looked out at the snowy landscape, letting the quiet fill him with resolve. Yes. For that, I'll do whatever is necessary. The days that followed were filled with an odd calm, a stillness that hinted at the magnitude of the shift. The northern lords, many of whom had at first been skeptical, gradually accepted the union. They watched Gendry prove his loyalty by helping oversee the training of new soldiers, forging fresh weapons in the Winterfell smithy, and even sharing evening meals with common soldiers. That sort of humble dedication resonated among northerners. For his part, Jon made plans to travel south. Storm's End beckoned. If this was truly a unified house, he should visit the Stormlands and meet the men under Gendry's banner, see to their concerns, and let them know the new arrangement wasn't just words on parchment. Gendry readily agreed, eager to return home but also determined to show Jon every corner of his domain. Sansa offered to manage Winterfell in Jon's absence. It's only right, she said. You trust me to keep the North safe, and I trust you to represent us well in the Stormlands. That's the heart of this alliance. The journey south was long and invigorating. Jon rode with Gendry at the head of a small retinue that included a mix of northern riders and Stormlanders who had traveled. North with Gendry. The King's Road felt different now, wider, emptier. The scars of war lingered in the form of half-rebuilt villages, blackened fields that had once been trampled by armies, the occasional burned farmstead. But there were also signs of renewal, new thatched roofs, fresh walls built with local timber, fields sowed with crops for the coming season. At each stop, curious eyes followed them. Children stared at the direwolf banner and the stag banner, and they gasped in awe when they realized these men were forging a new house. Some recognized Gendry from earlier days, remembering the rumors of Robert Baratheon's last living son. Others whispered about Jon, calling him the White Wolf, the man who had fought the dead, the rumored Targaryen heir who had given up his throne. There were still hushes of speculation, but nobody cried for war. The presence of a combined escort from both the North and the Stormlands spoke volumes. The realm had found a stable axis around which it might revolve. They reached the Stormlands under a leaden sky that threatened rain. Storm's End loomed tall, its walls battered by the ceaseless winds and driving rains that gave the region its name. For Jon, who had never visited this castle, it was a testament to the Baratheon resilience. Solid stone, formidable battlements, an ancient fortress that had withstood countless onslaughts. As they passed through the gates, the Stormlander soldiers lining the courtyard acknowledged their lord with respectful salutes. Gendry grinned, dismounting, looking every bit the proud leader returning home. He shook hands with some of the knights, exchanged quick words with the castellan. Then he turned to Jon. "Welcome to Storm's End," he said. Jon dismounted, taking in the fortress's imposing silhouette. "It's bigger than I imagined," he remarked. "It needs to be," Gendry replied. "The storms here are relentless. This castle is all that keeps us from being swept into the sea." They settled inside, stabling their horses, and found the castle's great hall warmed by roaring fires. Gendry immediately went to greet the local lords who had gathered, some traveling from lesser strongholds along the coast or from inland hamlets. The Stormlands were not as populous as the Reach, nor as vast as the North, but they had a proud martial tradition. The men who bowed to Gendry carried themselves with a rugged dignity, battered from war but unbroken. Jon stood at Gendry's side as they addressed the lords. It felt akin to the gathering in Winterfell, but now reversed. Gendry introduced Jon as a co-founder of House Baratheon Stark, a brother in arms, and the Stormlanders offered polite acceptance. Some were curious, others reserved, but none openly hostile. After all, the king had legitimized Gendry, and Gendry had proven his worth in battle. If he saw fit to share that worth with Jon Snow, few dared question it. For days, they toured the Stormlands. Jon accompanied Gendry on hunts in the dense, rain-soaked forests. They visited smaller villages battered by storms, listened to fisherfolk who risked the treacherous waters of Shipbreaker Bay. Jon, who had grown up in a land of snow and freezing winds, found these southern tempests no less formidable. The wind howled around the tower walls at night, the surf crashing against rocky cliffs, a reminder that nature could humble even the strongest fortress. In every place they stopped, Gendry took time to speak with the common folk, to ask how the harvest fared, to inquire after any brigands. Jon watched him, seeing the genuine concern that shone in Gendry's eyes. This was no pretender to a throne. This was a man who understood that leadership was about caring for those who had no power of their own. During a pause in their travels, one of Gendry's knights approached them in the courtyard of a smaller keep. "My lord," he said to Gendry, "there's a matter on the border near the Reach. Some men in that region refuse to acknowledge your new alliance, and they threaten to close off trade routes unless they receive tribute. They're petty lords too distant from Highgarden to be forced into compliance." Gendry glanced at Jon, an unspoken question in his eyes. "We'll ride out," Gendry decided. "We'll reason with them if we can, show them there's more to gain by cooperation." Jon agreed. "But if they turn to violence, we'll do what must be done." A few days later, they met the petty lords at a muddy crossroads, near the boundary where the Stormlands touched the outer edges of the Reach. Their small band arrived, banners of the wolf and stag side by side. The petty lords, little more than landed knights, stepped forward, arrogance coloring their tone. They demanded coin from travelers crossing the border, insisted that the new alliance was just another attempt at controlling them. Jon listened as Gendry tried to reason. "Trade benefits both sides," Gendry told them, water dripping from his cloak in the persistent drizzle. "If you close the roads, your people suffer as much as ours. Why starve your own folks?" One of the landed knights sneered. "We have no reason to bow to you, bastard of Robert. Nor do we care for the northern wolf. You think a new name or a new banner entitles you to rule us?" Jon felt anger surge in his chest, but he kept his composure. "We rule no one but our own lands," he said, voice steady. "You stand at the border of the Stormlands by King Bran's decree. If you've grievances, bring them to Storm's End or to Highgarden. Ambushing merchants is banditry, not lawful protest." The man spat on the ground. "The king is too far away to matter. You want these roads? Pay us." There was a tense hush, the drizzle forming rivulets down helmets and breastplates. Gendry's fist tightened on the reins of his horse. "I won't pay bullies," he said. "Nor will I watch you extort my people. You have two choices. Open the roads peacefully or face the consequences." The petty lords exchanged a look. Their men, though not numerous, seemed eager for a fight. They began to spread out, hands on weapons. Jon and Gendry exchanged a glance. This was no mere posturing. The hostility in the men's eyes was real, and opportunistic lawlessness left unchecked by the chaos of recent wars. A melee erupted in the wet, churned earth. Rain slicked the ground, making each step treacherous. Gendry dismounted, warhammer in hand, meeting a blade with a furious crash. Jon drew Longclaw, its Valyrian steel glinting in the dim daylight. Their small escort of Stormlander knights and northern guards engaged the foe, each fighting with the memory of the vow they had pledged. Jon dispatched two men who lunged at him with daggers, skillfully parrying blows and cutting them down with swift efficiency. He pressed forward, scanning for Gendry through the fray. He saw the big man smashing aside a knight's shield. Rain splattered Gendry's face, soaking his hair, but he fought with unwavering determination, every blow hammered home with lethal power. The petty lords realized too late that they were outmatched. One by one, their men fell or surrendered, tossed into the mud. When Jon cornered the sneering knight who had spat on the ground, he aimed Longclaw at the man's chest. "Yield," Jon demanded, breathing hard. The man's bravado faltered. Slowly, he sank to his knees. "I yield. 7 hells, I yield." Gendry approached, still gripping the warhammer, rainwater trickling down the leather of his tunic. He gazed at the knight who had scorned them. "Your lords in the Reach will hear about this," Gendry said. "You have no right to this land, and you have no right to block these roads. You will face justice." They bound the men, turned them over to a loyal castellan in a nearby keep for trial. Some might be forced to join the Night's Watch or face other punishments, depending on the severity of their crimes. It was another small example of the new House Baratheon Stark imposing order where chaos once thrived. After the skirmish, Jon and Gendry took refuge in a local inn, drying themselves by the fireplace. They were weary, bruised, but uninjured. As they shared a modest meal of bread and stew, Jon reflected on how often they seemed to find themselves bringing justice to places that had been left to fester. "A few petty lords, a handful of bandits," Gendry said, staring into the hearth. "Is this how we piece the realm back together, one broken corner at a time?" Jon nodded. "It might be. The realm is huge, and the war left a vacuum in many regions. This is our burden, ensuring that vacuum doesn't breed more chaos. A faint, tired smile touched Gendry's lips. I can live with that. When they finally returned to Storm's End after weeks of travel, word had already spread of their actions. The local lords saw that House Baratheon Stark was not content to sit in feasting halls, letting banditry run rampant. They witnessed how the new house extended justice even beyond its borders. Some lords offered alliances more readily now, eager to align themselves with a force that seemed both fair and resolute. Letters arrived from various corners of the realm, praising or inquiring about the new arrangement. Sansa wrote from Winterfell relaying how visitors were starting to pass through the north once more, bringing goods from White Harbor to the Trident, forging trade routes that had been dormant or unsafe. Late one afternoon, Gendry and Jon found themselves on a high balcony of Storm's End, watching the sea churn beneath a gray sky. The wind whipped at their cloaks, salt spray drifting up the cliff face. Gendry rested his hands on the stone balustrade, expression pensive. I never thought I'd be here, he said softly. A year ago, I was just learning what it meant to be Lord of Storm's End. Now, I'm forging a new house with you, recognized by the king, forging peace with every step. It's surreal. Jon stood beside him, ghost at his feet. I feel the same. But maybe this is the path we were meant to walk. We've both seen too much death to let it come again if we can help it. Gendry exhaled, nodding. I wonder what our fathers would say, Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, if they could see this day. Jon thought of Ned's quiet honor, Robert's boisterous strength. He suspected they both would have their reservations, but also their pride. They wanted a united realm. A better realm than what they had. Perhaps this is how we do it. They stayed there a long while, watching the storm clouds roll over the sea, lightning flickering in the distance. The new house they had built was untested, yet each test they faced, they did so together. The North and the Stormlands, bound by choice rather than conquest or marriage. It was a fragile hope, but a hope nonetheless. In the months and years ahead, they would face challenges, disgruntled lords, remnants of old rivalries, the complexities of interregional politics. But time and again, Gendry Baratheon and Jon Snow would lead side by side, guided by the memory of war and the promise of peace. Their banner, a dire wolf and a stag intertwined, flew over both Winterfell and Storm's End, a constant reminder that two once separate legacies had joined to forge something new. Small folk began to speak of them in stories around hearth fires, calling them the Wolf-Stag Lords or the bastards who wouldn't break. Children mimicked them in play, one taking up a wooden hammer, another a toy sword, forging alliances in the muddy lanes. In taverns, minstrels composed songs that told of how a quiet man from the north and a blacksmith's son from the Stormlands rose to unify two great houses, bridging the gap between them without the shedding of innocent blood. And beneath it all, the realm slowly healed. Fields were replanted, villages rebuilt. Ships began to sail between White Harbor and Storm's End, carrying grain and salted fish. The roads, patrolled by combined forces, became safer. People who had once feared the next war found a measure of peace in the steadiness of this alliance. When King Bran, in his measured wisdom, declared an official day of thanks for the realm's renewal, House Baratheon Stark representatives stood at the Red Keep, witnessing how far Westeros had come. Tyrion, still hand of the king, greeted them with a nod that spoke more than any words of gratitude could. Ser Brienne, now Lord Commander of the King's Guard, offered them her respect, remembering well how they had all fought together on the long night. In time, as the old lords died and younger generations took their place, the concept of a Stark-Baratheon alliance became normal, a part of the accepted fabric of Westeros. Though new storms would inevitably come and winters would test their fortitude, a foundation had been laid that would not easily be shaken. Jon Snow and Gendry Baratheon had not sought glory, yet they had found a kind of fame. They had not yearned for a crown, yet they had crafted a dynasty of their own, one not centered on a single throne, but on the principle that power shared is power tempered and that friendship can be stronger than fear. Above all, they learned that healing a land torn by war demanded humility, courage, and a willingness to rewrite tradition in favor of the greater good. In the quiet moments, each man carried his private burdens, memories of friends lost, battles fought, the bitter truth of knowing that even success could not bring back the dead. But those memories fueled their resolve to continue forging a better future. The cold determination of the North merged with the passionate spirit of the Stormlands, forging not just swords of steel, but swords of purpose. And so the new Baratheon, Stark dynasty took root, grounded in the lessons of the past, growing toward a more hopeful tomorrow. In the eyes of the realm, they were bastards turned lords, anomalies who had defied the odds and refused to bow to old resentments. In their own eyes, they were simply men who had learned the true cost of war and vowed to pay no more. If any doubted them, if any whispered in dark corners that a new war might erupt, time gradually proved them wrong. For it was not by conquest or dragon fire that Jon Snow and Gendry Baratheon shaped the future, but by the unwavering decision to stand together, forging a legacy that would outlast the storms and snows of any winter to come. Jon Snow stood in the courtyard of Storm's End as the rumbling sea winds battered the fortress walls. A thin drizzle, carried inward on the gusts, flecked his cloak and dampened his hair. He was dressed in plain riding leathers despite the chill, long claw sheathed at his side, Ghost always somewhere nearby. Across the yard, Gendry Baratheon spoke with two knights who had just returned from patrolling the roads leading to the Reach, and Jon could see from the men's expressions that they were pleased with what they had found. Trade routes were safer, villages were seeing more travelers, and the once ravaged countryside was coaxed back to life by those who tilled the soil. House Baratheon Stark was new by name, but its mark on the realm was already evident in the sight of caravans trundling along roads that, a year ago, had been plagued by outlaws and petty lords, each scheming to fill their coffers. It had been many moons since Jon and Gendry forged their vow in Winterfell's courtyard, uniting the wolf and the stag under a single banner. In that time, Jon had traveled extensively between the Stormlands and the north, sometimes alone, sometimes with Gendry, and sometimes with a contingent of knights whose shared loyalty symbolized the broader idea that the realm's divisions must not widen. Though Jon often longed for the familiar hush of Winterfell's godwood, he also felt a growing connection to Storm's End with its crashing waves and near-constant storms. He had come to understand that both places were home in their own ways. As he watched the knights hand Gendry a hastily written report, Jon wondered how much simpler life might have been had war never erupted, if the White Walkers had remained a distant legend, if Daenerys Targaryen had not unleashed dragonfire upon King's Landing. Yet he knew better than to dwell too long on such thoughts. If there was one thing war had taught him, it was that the only direction worth moving was forward. Now, he and Gendry were forging a legacy that might prevent another catastrophe. It felt as if their entire bond was an answer to a realm exhausted by madness. Gendry dismissed the knights, then crossed the courtyard to Jon. Rainwater clung to Gendry's short, dark hair, his face ruddy from the sting of the wind. Even now, he looked more like a warrior than a typical lord, but that was a part of his strength. He came to stand beside Jon and gazed out through the wide archway where the sea churned. "They say the roads are clear," Gendry said, voice raised slightly above the wind. "Some of the petty lords who were causing trouble have submitted to the authority of Highgarden and Storm's End. Others have vanished or joined the Night's Watch. Seems the banditry has quieted." Jon dipped his head in acknowledgement. "That's good news. People are starting to notice that law exists again, enforced by more than just empty threats." Gendry shot him a grin. "Let's hope they keep noticing. We didn't swear our oaths just to spend our days swinging swords at bandits in the mud." His grin dimmed into a thoughtful expression. "We have another matter, though. A messenger arrived from King's Landing early this morning, brought a sealed letter from King Bran." Jon's heartbeat quickened at the mention of Bran, memories of his brother's distant gaze surfacing in his mind. "What did he say?" "Bran wants us in King's Landing, both of us," Gendry replied. "There's talk of a formal tourney to honor the realm's new era of peace. The crown apparently wants House Baratheon Stark present. He also mentions something about unrest in the Stepstones, those islands used by sails and pirates. Possibly a call for help to curb the piracy that's threatening trade from Essos." Jon exhaled, feeling the tug of duty. The realm was large, and its troubles came in many forms. "We can't refuse a direct request from Bran. But I wonder what good we'll do discussing pirates in the Stepstones. That's more a matter for the royal fleet." Gendry shrugged. "He probably wants to ensure the great houses are unified in the decision, maybe coordinate efforts so no region gets blindsided by trade disruptions. The Reach and the Westerlands might not care if a few ships get taken at sea, but the crown has to care. And the new age of peace Bran envisions depends on cooperation." Jon looked back up at the looming walls of Storm's End. "We've only just settled matters here. But if the king commands, we'll go." They agreed that leaving a reliable castellan in charge was best, along with a garrison of knights loyal to the new house. Although Gendry was the Lord of Storm's End, he'd become used to delegating authority to men he trusted. Meanwhile, Jon sent a raven north to inform Sansa that they would be away in King's Landing for a time. She, as Lady of Winterfell, could handle any concerns in the north. By midday, they were preparing to depart. The courtyard bustled with activity as squires loaded supplies onto packhorses. The combined banners of the dire wolf and the stag snapped in the stiff breeze, a visual reminder of the vow that had changed the political landscape. Gendry joined Jon near the stables, where Ghost stood with a watchful, near-silent demeanor. The direwolf's fur had thickened again, ready for colder climes, but Ghost adapted easily to the Stormlands and rarely strayed from Jon's side. "We'll keep the escort small," Gendry said, tying off the saddlebags on his horse. "A few Stormlanders, a few Northerners, enough to show we represent both houses, but not enough to crowd the roads. After all, this is a peaceful journey, not a campaign." Jon nodded, remembering how the roads had once been lined with battered armies and fleeing peasants. "Yes, a small retinue is best." They rode out that afternoon, passing under the arched gate of Storm's End. The ocean winds followed them for a time, but as they turned inland, the roar of the sea gave way to the rustle of wooded hills and the rolling farmland that fed the Stormlands. Villages dotted the route, and at each one, the locals paused to watch the men bearing the twin banners. Children pointed, calling out excitedly that the wolf-stag lords rode together again. Some recalled the rumors of how Jon Snow had been the rightful heir to the Iron Throne yet renounced it. Others whispered of Gendry's humble upbringing as a blacksmith's apprentice, only for fate to lift him high. Every whispered story reinforced the sense of awe that hung around them, but neither Jon nor Gendry let it go to their heads. They carried too many memories of war to find pride in the pageantry. They made camp near dusk beside a bend in the road, where a small river provided fresh water for horses. The Stormlander and Northern guards mingled around the fire, trading jokes or comparing stories of their homelands. Some teased each other about the harsh cold or never-ending rain, while others swapped tales of old battles. Jon and Gendry shared in a simple meal of bread and hearty stew, left over from the supplies Storm's End had provided. Ghost rested at Jon's flank, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air. After finishing their meal, Jon slipped away from the group to find a patch of ground by the river's edge. He crouched there, rinsing his hands in the cold flow, letting the quiet lull him. The flicker of torchlight behind him cast dancing shadows on the grass. He heard the crunch of boots and turned to see Gendry approaching. "Thought you might be out here," Gendry said, arms folded. "You've been quieter than usual since we set off." Jon dried his hands on his cloak. "Just thinking about Bran's summons. The last time we were all in King's Landing, it was complicated. I still have memories of that day the bells rang and everything burned." Gendry's expression darkened slightly. "We lost a lot in that war, but things are different now. Bran's not a tyrant, and the city is slowly rebuilding. We'll be there for a tourney, right? And some counsel on how to handle the pirates. It shouldn't be anything like the old days." Jon stood, meeting Gendry's gaze. "I know. It's just, the past never truly leaves us. Sometimes I see the burned ruins in my dreams. Sometimes I remember Daenerys. She wanted to break the wheel, but instead, he broke off, swallowing. It's hard to step foot in that city without feeling the weight of it all." Gendry gripped Jon's shoulder, an unspoken sympathy in his eyes. "We're forging a new path. That's all we can do. If that means facing old ghosts, we'll face them." Jon managed a small nod. Together, they walked back toward the campfire, the glow illuminating the circle of men. Night settled over the Stormlands, but it was no longer the oppressive, starless night they had once endured when the threat of the dead loomed. This was a mere darkness of nature, punctured by the warmth of companionship. They set out early the next morning, traveling steadily along roads that wound toward the Rose Road and, eventually, the Crownlands. Each day brought them closer to King's Landing. Jon found himself gazing at the horizon, remembering the first time he had approached the city with Tyrion by his side. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now Tyrion was Hand of the King, and Jon was forging a destiny he never sought. On the 6th day, they crested a rise that gave them a view of the city in the distance. King's Landing sprawled along the Blackwater Bay, its walls and towers distinct even from afar. Jon's heart clenched at the sight of the red keep's outline against the midday sun. It was new in places. Reconstruction efforts had replaced many parts damaged in the war. The city looked familiar yet changed, as though it had spent years healing from grievous wounds. They descended the road and soon reached the city gates. Gold Cloaks inspected them briefly but recognized the banners and parted to let them pass. The streets were busy, throngs of people going about their lives. Market stalls were piled with fruits, fish, and bread. The air smelled of saltwater, spices, and the sweaty press of thousands of bodies. Jon noted fresh-faced guards wearing the sigil of the king, a raven in flight, denoting Bran's house name and the symbolism he had chosen. The city bustled more peacefully than Jon remembered from the last days of the war. There was poverty, yes, and small shadows of cruelty that lingered in any city, but no sense of panic or dread. Gendry guided them to a courtyard near the Red Keep where the king's stable hands took their horses. As they dismounted, a familiar figure emerged from the keep's entrance, limping slightly on one foot. Tyrion Lannister had not changed much. His hair remained thinning and silver in patches, and a few more lines etched his face, but his mismatched eyes still gleamed with a mixture of intelligence and wry humor. "Ah," Tyrion said, spreading his arms in greeting, the wolf and the stag gracing us with their presence. "Welcome back to King's Landing." Gendry inclined his head. "Lord Hand," he said formally, though a smile tugged at his lips. "Where shall we put our men?" Tyrion gestured to some attendants. "They'll be given quarters near the barracks. As for you two, I've arranged suites inside the Red Keep proper, unless you'd prefer the brothels of Flea Bottom, Gendry, but I suspect you've risen in the world since those days." He added the last with a teasing grin, but Gendry just laughed and shook his head. Jon offered Tyrion a polite nod. "It's good to see you, Tyrion. How's the king?" Tyrion's expression grew more serious. "Pensive as ever, but well. He's in the Solar with the rest of the small council, finalizing details for the tourney. He'll want to speak with you both at your earliest convenience." They followed Tyrion into the Red Keep, passing corridors that Jon remembered well. Ghost padded beside him, earning startled looks from passing servants unaccustomed to a dire wolf in the halls. The castle bore signs of refurbishment, freshly painted walls, new tapestries, and a certain hush that suggested more care was taken these days to maintain order. The hush also felt like a testament to Bran's calmer style of rule: no raucous parties, no drunken small council members wandering at odd hours. Soon they entered a tall, vaulted chamber where Bran the Broken, King Bran Stark, sat in a high-backed chair near a wide table. He no longer used the Iron Throne. That monstrous seat of swords had been melted down, replaced by a simpler dais to reflect a new era. Around him stood or sat various lords and council members: Ser Brienne of Tarth in pristine white armor, Davos Seaworth leaning over a map spread on the table, and a handful of other advisors. Scribes scribbled at the edges, ready to record every detail. Bran's eyes lifted as Jon and Gendry approached. Something about his gaze still unsettled Jon, a distance, a quiet wisdom that seemed to peer not merely at the present but through the tides of time. Nonetheless, Bran's lips curved into a small, welcoming smile. "Jon, Gendry, thank you for coming so quickly." Jon bowed his head. "Your Grace." He found it strange to address Bran so, but the realm was built on appearances and it was proper to show respect. Gendry bowed as well. "We came as soon as we received your summons." Tyrion mentioned the matter of attorney. Tyrion cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Yes, the king wishes to host a grand tourney to celebrate the realm's relative peace. The small folk love such events, and it's an opportunity to reaffirm alliances. Lords from all over Westeros are invited. With this new era, we can't miss a chance to remind everyone that old grudges have no place here." Bran's voice was calm. "It will also serve as an example that House Baratheon Stark stands with the throne. Some lords outside the Stormlands and the North still wonder how this new arrangement fits into the broader tapestry of Westeros. A public show of friendship will ease many doubts." Jon exchanged a quick glance with Gendry, recalling their vow in Winterfell. Both had promised to stand by the crown, to remain loyal to Bran's reign as long as it served the realm. Jon could see no reason to refuse the king's request. "We'll do what you ask," he said, "though you mentioned trouble in the Stepstones as well." Davos nodded, stepping closer to the table. I've been hearing from merchants. Pirates are raiding ships coming around the southern tip of Dorne, attacking vessels that sail from Essos to Westeros. If it continues, it'll drive up the cost of trade goods and force some shipping lanes to be abandoned. The king is weighing how best to respond." Gendry frowned. "We have no dragons, no massive royal fleet. The Greyjoys might help, if Yara is so inclined, but the Ironborn aren't known for their sympathy toward merchants." Tyrion tented his fingers. "Indeed, we're at a crossroads. The realm is war-weary. No one wants a major campaign in the Stepstones, but ignoring it will only embolden these pirates. King Bran seeks a strategy that prevents bloodshed from spilling across half the narrow sea." Bran's gaze flicked from one face to another. "I want your counsel on that, but first, rest from your journey." We'll convene a full discussion later tonight, after the small council session. The tourney is scheduled for 6 days hence, and we'll have lords arriving daily. Jon inclined his head. As you wish. Thank you, your grace. Once the formalities concluded, Brienne of Tarth stepped forward. She greeted Jon and Gendry with a warm sincerity. Jon remembered how she had fought beside them at Winterfell. Gendry gave a short bow of respect to her new station as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. She wore the white cloak with quiet pride, her bearing as dignified as ever. In the halls of the Red Keep, she was perhaps the most respected knight alive. Her dedication was a living testament to oaths kept and honor unsullied. Brienne personally escorted them to their chambers, which were adjacent, well-appointed, and overlooked the city and bay beyond. Though comfortable, Jon felt a pang of memory at the sight of these halls. Reminders of times past when he had walked them with Daenerys, or stood alone, uncertain of the wars that lay ahead. Gendry, for his part, seemed more at ease, but Jon noticed tension in his posture as well. The Red Keep was a place of ghosts for them both. They took the rest of the day to settle in. Jon visited the castle's training yard, where he found the clack of practice swords and the panting of young squires comforting in its familiarity. Ghost followed him, eliciting sideways glances from the men sparring. Gendry, on the other hand, caught up with a few Stormlander knights who had traveled ahead of them, gleaning the mood of the capital. He heard that many lords looked forward to the tourney, a chance to flaunt their skill, gain favor at court, maybe even earn royal notice. The city's markets bustled, and tavern chatter bristled with speculation about who might emerge the champion in the justs. That evening, in a private solar near the top of one of the keep's towers, the king convened a smaller council session. Jon and Gendry joined Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and a few others. By candlelight and under the watchful eyes of guards stationed near the doors, they discussed the stepstones. There were few easy answers. The royal fleet was modest, mostly used for transporting goods or patrolling local waters. The lords of the Reach had ships, as did the Vale, though they used them sparingly. Yara Greyjoy, if she could be persuaded, might offer the Iron Fleet, but her price or her reliability remained uncertain. Eventually, they settled on a cautious plan: dispatch envoys to the free cities, gather intelligence on the pirates' numbers and leaders, and then decide whether a small coalition fleet could end the threat with minimal bloodshed. Jon and Gendry both agreed that it was better to be thorough than to rush into a naval engagement that might spark a wider conflict. After the meeting, Tyrion lingered in the solar, gesturing for Jon and Gendry to remain. The others filed out, leaving them alone in the warm glow of the hearth. "You know," Tyrion said, refilling a goblet of wine, "the lords here are curious about your house, Baratheon Stark. Some say it's a cunning ploy to concentrate power. Others consider it a genuine attempt at lasting peace. And some do both." Gendry set his shoulders in a relaxed but resolute stance. "We're not trying to undermine the king, if that's what they think. Our vow is made in front of everyone." Tyrion nodded. "I believe you. But I also know how the game is played. You'll have to keep showing them that you mean no harm, or, indeed, that you're vital to the realm's stability. This tourney might help. Appear in public, enjoy the festivities, show unity. Remind them the wolf and stag stand loyal." Jon, who had been studying the flicker of the fire, looked up. "We have no intention of playing the game for personal gain. If anything, I'd rather be out in the field, ensuring roads are safe, than in a jousting gallery. But I'll do what needs to be done." Tyrion chuckled softly. Spoken like a man who's seen too much for any illusions of glamour. "But trust me, sometimes a little pageantry goes a long way in convincing others of your sincerity. Appear open, strong, and loyal, and the realm will warm to you." They exchanged a few more words before parting ways. Jon and Gendry returned to their chambers, each lost in private thoughts. The next few days rolled by in a wave of arrivals, lords from the Vale, the Westerlands, the Reach, Dorne, and beyond. The city became a tapestry of house sigils, bright plumes, and the excited hum of anticipation for the tourney. The common folk cheered the parade of knights in gleaming armor, their horses adorned with colorful caparisons. Taverns filled to bursting, rumors and coin flowing as fast as the ale. In that swirl of activity, Jon found himself visited by a surprising guest one late afternoon. As he stepped into the corridor outside his chamber, he nearly collided with Arya Stark. She stood there, dressed in practical leathers, a faint smirk curving her lips. Her hair was cropped shorter than before, and there was a confident, roving gleam in her eyes that spoke of distant horizons. Jon's breath caught. Arya, he said, a rush of warmth flooding him. When did you return? She shrugged. Arrived this morning, slipped past the city gates. You know how I am. She gave Ghost a pat on the head. Ghost sniffed her hand and then huffed, tail wagging slightly at a familiar scent. He hasn't forgotten me, good? Neither have you, I hope. Jon pulled Arya into a quick embrace, ignoring the passing servants who tried not to stare. Never. Sansa and Bran said you were off exploring lands beyond the maps. I was, she answered, stepping back. But I heard about the tourney and word travels faster than you'd expect. Decided I'd see what all the fuss was about. Besides, it's been far too long since I've checked in on you all. Jon couldn't hide a soft laugh. I'm glad you're here. Later, he brought Arya to meet Gendry in a side courtyard. They had parted on strange terms once, with Gendry professing a sort of affection that Arya had brushed aside in favor of her freedom. Now, she greeted him with that same self-assured air, though a subtle warmth glimmered behind her eyes. Lord Baratheon, she teased, crossing her arms. You wear it well, I see. Gendry scratched the back of his neck, looking momentarily sheepish. I do what I must, he replied. But you? I didn't know you'd be in King's Landing for the tourney. Are you planning to join the festivities? Arya's smirk widened. I might. Don't expect me to spend hours in the stands sipping wine, though. If the free lists are open, maybe I'll enter. She laughed at the startled look on Gendry's face. I'm only jesting mostly. Tournaments aren't really my style. But I am curious to see who'll be fighting and if anyone from the old days still thinks they can challenge me. Gendry and Jon exchanged a glance, both clearly recalling just how formidable Arya could be with a blade. It's good you're here, Jon said softly, meaning it. Having Arya around felt like a piece of home had returned, even if only briefly. In the days leading up to the tourney, the city bristled with anticipation. Lists were erected in the sprawling fields outside the city walls, providing ample space for jousting lanes, archery butts, and melee pits. Pavilions sprouted like colorful mushrooms, each bearing the sigil of a noble house. Merchants hawked everything from lemon cakes to exotic curiosities from Essos. Jugglers and musicians paraded along the main avenues. Children ran underfoot, cheering knights as they passed. Jon and Gendry maintained a visible presence, riding together through the city or conferring with Tyrion and the King's Council. After so many months forging their house as a shield against disorder, it felt strange to see the realm so thoroughly enthralled by celebration. Yet it seemed a welcome relief from the tragedies of recent years. Jon, while not particularly fond of the noise and bustle, appreciated the sense of collective exhalation. One afternoon, they paid a courtesy call to Ser Brienne near the White Sword Tower, where the Kingsguard resided. As they stepped inside, they found Brienne in discussion with Podrick Payne, who had risen to the rank of a knight himself. Podrick nearly tripped over his own feet to offer them a bow. Brienne greeted them warmly, but Jon noticed she seemed even more guarded than usual. How's security? Gendry asked, glancing at the bright tapestry that now hung on one wall, an embroidered scene of the Battle of the Trident featuring Robert Baratheon's famous blow against Rhaegar Targaryen. The irony of that tapestry was not lost on either Jon or Gendry, given the complicated legacies they carried. Brienne straightened. We've brought an extra city watchman for the tourney. The crown can't afford a riot or any sort of disruption. I have my knights patrolling day and night. So far, aside from the usual brawls between drunken knights, it's been quiet. Jon nodded. Let's hope it remains so. The day of the tourney arrived in a blaze of sunlight. Crowds thronged outside the city gate, pushing toward the wide fields. Raised wooden stands held the wealthy and the noble, shaded by awnings of dyed cloth. Small folk clambered for whatever vantage point they could find, perched on fences or mounds of earth. An almost festive tension shimmered in the air, people cheering, gambling, roaring with approval whenever a knight in full regalia trotted past on a barred horse. Bran, as king, appeared in a well-constructed viewing box at the center of the stands, flanked by Tyrion, Davos, Ser Brienne, and other dignitaries. Jon and Gendry joined them, no longer simply watchers but recognized among the higher echelons of power. Arya, however, chose to slip into the crowd, her hood drawn, content to watch from among the common folk. Knights from across the 7 kingdoms assembled on the field, each determined to make a name for himself. Some brandished bright shields, singing of family heritage. Others wore plainer armor, relying on skill rather than pageantry to see them through. The justs commenced with a fanfare of trumpets and a flourish of banners. The first tilts saw gallant displays and splintering lances. The stands erupted in applause whenever a rider unhorsed his opponent. Occasionally, a knight would go down hard, knocked senseless in the dirt. only to be dragged away by squires. None, so far, met a fatal end, though everyone knew how easily a tilt could go wrong. Gendry found himself caught up in the spectacle. He had never been a great jouster, though he was no stranger to mounted combat. Jon, for his part, watched with calm interest, thoughts drifting to how Ned Stark had once viewed tourneys. A distraction from real warfare, but also a place where alliances were quietly tested. A man who fought well in a tourney might win the favor of a powerful lord. That favor might translate to political support. Jon was astute enough to see that these events were never merely about sport. Between the tilts, Tyrion made witty commentary, keeping the king and the crowd entertained. Occasionally, King Bran would lean over and speak quietly to him, though his expression remained inscrutable. Down below, heralds called the names of the next pair of knights. Some from the north, some from the Stormlands, some from distant corners of Westeros. The variety underscored the new unity that the realm was attempting to embody. As dusk approached, the jousting for the day concluded, and the merriment spread to various pavilions. A feast was held in a large, open-air banquet area, lit by torches and lanterns. Roasted boar, venison, and all manner of fruits and pastries lined the tables. Wine flowed freely, fueling laughter, boasts, and whispered negotiations. Musicians played lively tunes, prompting a few couples to attempt dancing on the grass, skirts swirling, boots stomping. Jon and Gendry mingled, each taking note of who approached them. A few minor lords from the Westerlands introduced themselves, congratulating them on the union of House Baratheon Stark and hinting at possible marriage alliances for the future. Others told stories of how grateful they were that the roads were safer now, thanks to the combined efforts of their men. Jon, uneasy in social gatherings, kept his responses polite but brief, while Gendry was more open and good-humored. Still, Gendry's words bore an edge of caution. Both men had grown wary of flattery. Somewhere amid the revelry, Arya appeared briefly. She slipped up behind Gendry with a mock-solemn expression. "I see you're enjoying yourself, my lord," she teased, flicking a piece of lint off his cloak. "Careful you don't get trapped by all those marriage-minded lords with daughters to pawn off." Gendry flushed. "I can handle myself. Where've you been?" Arya shrugged. "Watching, listening." There's no shortage of interesting characters here, but I won't linger. I like my freedom too much to stand around smiling. With that, she disappeared again into the crowd, leaving Gendry staring after her with a mixture of confusion and amusement. Jon, who had overheard, simply smiled to himself. Later in the evening, while the torches burned low and many of the revelers were deep into their cups, a hush spread through the banquet area. Jon, who had been speaking quietly with Davos about a rumor of renewed bandit activity near Maiden Pool, glanced up to see a knight in blackened steel armor standing in the firelight. He wore no heraldic device on his shield, just a deep, reflective sheen. The visor of his helm was down, concealing his face. This mysterious knight raised a gauntlet hand, calling for attention. A herald, somewhat perplexed, stepped forward. "Identify yourself, sire," the herald requested in a loud voice, which had the effect of causing every conversation to pause. The Black Knight's voice boomed from inside the helm. "I am the Knight of Woe, come from distant shores to test my skill against the best in Westeros. I challenge any who dares face me on the morrow in single combat to prove the realm's strength and the justice of its king." An immediate murmur spread among the onlookers. Some rolled their eyes, taking this for typical tourney drama. Others seemed intrigued by the theatrical display. Jon and Gendry exchanged glances, curiosity piqued. A masked knight with no sigil might be a sellsword seeking fame, or perhaps a lesser lord hiding his identity to fight more freely. It wasn't unheard of in tournaments, but it was always a gamble. Tyrion ambled over to Jon and Gendry, swirling wine in his goblet. Well, he said softly. "A mysterious challenger. It wouldn't be a proper tourney without at least one." Jon kept his gaze on the Black Knight, who stood rigid as a statue. "He'll have his chance in the lists tomorrow if that's what he wants. But I hope he's not here for something more sinister." Gendry shrugged. "If he is, we'll soon find out. A man in a helm can only hide so much." With that, the tension gradually subsided, replaced by more hushed speculation. The Knight of Woe departed without another word, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. Jon and Gendry felt a prickle of unease. The realm might be at peace, but they both knew peace was fragile, easily broken by one ambitious or reckless individual. Night deepened and the festivities wound down. The next day dawned bright, the sky cleared of clouds as if nature itself encouraged the spectacle to continue. The second round of justs began, gradually narrowing the field as knights were unhorsed or withdrew. The crowd cheered favorites, groaned at upsets, and placed frantic bets with shady bookmakers in the stands. Trumpets blared each time two new challengers trotted onto the field. Eventually, the herald announced the arrival of the Knight of Woe. Once again clad in black steel, the anonymous man rode onto the field on a dark courser, holding a lance with surprising steadiness. The hush that followed was expectant. Who would face him? A young knight from the Reach volunteered first. He had proven himself skilled in the earlier tilts, unhorsing two knights. But against the Knight of Woe, he lasted only one pass. The Knight of Woe's lance struck with pinpoint precision, sending the young knight crashing into the dirt. When the Black Knight moved on to challenge another, the second knight fared little better. Onlookers began to realize that this was no mere braggart. The Knight of Woe displayed impeccable timing and control. By late afternoon, no fewer than 3 knights had fallen to him. Jon, watching from Bran's viewing box, felt a growing suspicion. This Knight of Woe fought with a style that seemed oddly familiar, yet he couldn't place it. Even Gendry, who enjoyed watching the skill, voiced his curiosity. He wields that lance like it's a dart, right on target every time. Tyrion leaned on the edge of the box, scanning the field. He's either highly experienced or extremely lucky, perhaps both. I wouldn't want to be next in line to face him. By the time the day's events ended, the Knight of Woe stood undefeated among the Justers, the crowd buzzing with speculation. Some claimed he must be a famed knight from the Free Cities in disguise, or a scion of House Tarly with a vendetta to prove. Others whispered that the Knight of Woe was Rhaegar Targaryen's ghost reborn, seeking vengeance. An absurd rumor, but it circulated all the same. That evening, many feasted again, though the sense of easy frivolity was replaced by a keener excitement. Who would unmask the Black Knight, if anyone? When the Knight of Woe did not appear at the feast, the speculation only grew. Jon felt an uneasy tension coil in his stomach. The realm was stable, but stability never lasted long when intrigue took hold. The following morning, the melee competition began. A large ring was marked out, where knights and men-at-arms could fight with blunted weapons in a chaotic free-for-all. Usually, this event was a crowd favorite, full of dramatic reversals and comedic scuffles. Some knights formed temporary alliances to eliminate stronger foes, then turned on each other. Jon had participated in melees before, but now he merely observed from a seat among the lords, next to Gendry. The Knight of Woe did not appear in the initial lineup, furthering the mystery of his identity and intentions. As the melee raged, with men clanging swords and axes, the stands roared their approval. Ser Brienne herself had volunteered to fight in the melee, though many knights hesitated to strike her, respectful of her status as Lord Commander. She disarmed them anyway with elegant strokes, refusing to hold back. Gendry couldn't help but grin, admiring her skill, while Jon marveled at how the crowd cheered her name. The realm had come far if a female knight could be so openly celebrated. Midway through, however, the Knight of Woe appeared at the edge of the arena astride his dark mount, brandishing a blunted longsword. A wave of exclamations rippled through the crowd. The melee temporarily paused as the Knight of Woe dismounted and stepped into the fray. No sooner did he join than he began methodically disabling opponents, using cunning footwork and precise strikes. His black steel armor absorbed glancing blows, and his swordsmanship proved even more formidable than his jousting. He knocked aside a burly knight's axe, tripped another with a sweep, and parried an overhead strike from a third, responding with a blow that sent the man's sword spinning across the dirt. Jon leaned forward, heart-thumping. That style, it's so calculated. Each movement purposeful, no wasted energy. His suspicion flared again, but still, he couldn't pinpoint why it looked so familiar. Gendry rose halfway from his seat as if the tension were pulling him to his feet. In the ring, knights and men-at-arms struggled to mount a combined offense against this unstoppable figure. Ser Brienne maneuvered closer, drawn by the challenge of such an opponent. The crowd realized the two were about to clash, and a collective hush fell. She advanced, sword at the ready, measuring the Knight of Woe's stance. He turned to face her. They circled each other, the rest of the melee seeming to fall back to watch. Brienne struck first, a swift diagonal slash aimed at catching his side. The Knight of Woe blocked and riposted, forcing her to twist aside. Their blades sang against each other, sparks flying. The crowd gasped as the Knight of Woe forced Brienne back a step. She was strong, well-trained, yet this knight met her blow for blow. Jon's suspicion mounted. Hardly anyone outside of a handful of living warriors could press Brienne so thoroughly. Despite the Knight of Woe's skill, Brienne adapted quickly, using her superior height and leverage to shift his center of gravity. She aimed a well-timed pommel strike at his helm, but he jerked his head back, rolling under her blade. He spun behind her, hooking an arm around her torso to unbalance her. She staggered, but at the last moment, Brienne slammed an elbow into his breastplate and sent him reeling. They parted, breathing heavily, swords raised. The crowd roared, enthralled. Then, in a split second of distraction, no one was sure if it was the churned dirt or a stray body glancing against Brienne's legs. Ser Brienne lost her footing. She stumbled, and the Knight of Woe capitalized with a disarming maneuver, twisting her sword out of her grip. Her blade fell, clattering on the ground. With his free hand, he shoved her firmly but not brutally onto her back. A stunned hush silenced the stands. Even Tyrion gaped, his wine goblet paused near his lips. Panting, the Knight of Woe placed the tip of his sword near Brienne's breastplate, indicating victory. She stared up at him, chest heaving. No one had seen Brienne undone so decisively in years. Shock rippled through the spectators. Then, with a curt nod, the Knight of Woe drew back his blade and offered Brienne a hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, allowing him to help her to her feet. The hush broke into thunderous applause, a roar of excitement, astonishment, even confusion. Who was this masked fighter to best Ser Brienne of Tarth? The Knight of Woe lifted his visor, revealing a face hidden beneath a black cloth that wrapped his head. Only his eyes were visible. Then, in a gesture reminiscent of Arthur Dayne's old stories, he bowed to Brienne. She inclined her head in return, acknowledging his victory with stoic grace. Triumphant but silent, he marched out of the ring. Knights parted to let him pass, some in awe, others in resentment. The melee resumed, but the crowd's focus remained fixed on the Black Knight's retreating figure. Jon rose to his feet, scanning the stands and the field, uncertain if he should intervene or if there was anything to intervene against. Gendry looked at him, a deep frown etching his brow. "We need to find out who he is." Jon nodded. "Agreed." With a look to the king's box, Jon caught Bran's eye. Bran's expression was unreadable, as though he already knew something but remained silent. Jon couldn't decide if that was just Bran's typical demeanor or a sign of deeper knowledge. Regardless, they couldn't leave it at that. Once the melee ended, Knight staggered out, battered and exhausted. Brienne, who had recovered her sword, spoke with Podrick. She cast the occasional glance around, seemingly as puzzled as everyone else by the Black Knight's identity and skill. Tyrion approached them, letting out a low whistle. "Well, that was unexpected. We'll all be talking about this for months." Jon turned to Gendry. "Let's see if we can learn anything. Maybe someone's seen him returning to a particular tent." They moved swiftly, stepping down from the stands. After retrieving Ghost, who had grown restless with the crowd and waited nearby, they began to weave through the labyrinth of pavilions and tents. Armorers hammered out dents in battered plate, squires lugged gear from place to place. Men boasted or lamented the day's results. Occasionally, someone would point them in a direction where the Knight of Woe had been glimpsed. An hour later, they'd found no trace. Any inquiry was met with shrugs or contradictory rumors. Some claimed they saw him slip down an alleyway, others insisted he entered a black pavilion near the far edge of the encampment, only to vanish. They even checked with the city watch, but no guard seemed to have any record of him. Eventually, as dusk crept across the sky, Jon and Gendry paused near a cluster of torches that lit a wide path through the camp. "He's clearly skilled at covering his tracks," Jon muttered, frustration simmering just beneath his cool demeanor. Gendry nodded, scanning the shadows. "We'll have to be patient. If he's entered the lists, he'll appear again for the final rounds. Maybe then we can corner him. But something feels off. Why hide everything so thoroughly?" They returned to the Red Keep. The king had convened a celebratory feast in one of the grand halls. But Jon and Gendry arrived late, each preoccupied with thoughts of the mysterious night. The hall was alive with song, laughter, and the clink of goblets. Servants carried roasted meats, spiced wines, and elaborate pastries shaped like dragons and wolves. Overhead, banners of every major house fluttered in the candlelit air, and at the high table, Bran presided with Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and a handful of other luminaries. Jon and Gendry took their seats near the front, each picking at their food rather than truly feasting. Tyrion spotted them and ambled over, wine in hand. "You look like two hounds who've lost the scent." Gendry sighed. "If you have any insight, share it. We've found nothing of the Knight of Woe. No tent, no squire, nothing." Tyrion's brows rose. "No squire? That is odd. Even the simplest hedge knight has someone to assist with armor." He took a sip of wine, contemplating. "I suspect your friend is an outsider, then, or someone with enough gold to hire discreet help. Could be an assassin or just an overcautious knight. The question is why he bothered to challenge Brienne so openly." Jon suppressed a shudder. He didn't challenge her specifically, he faced whomever came. Brienne just happened to cross blades with him, but his skill is undeniable. "He's as good as anyone I've seen, save perhaps a few legends of the Kingsguard. And a few living warriors," Tyrion interjected, looking pointedly at Jon. Jon shook his head. "I'm not that skilled with a lance. A sword, yes, but it's been years since I trained to face knights in a melee setting like that." Tyrion tapped his goblet. "Well, if he fights in the final rounds, we may yet see a clash that answers our questions. In the meantime, enjoy the feast. Worrying on an empty stomach is a poor strategy." Jon forced a smile. He tried to eat, but his mind churned. The tension in the air, the possibility that the Knight of Woe had come with hidden intentions, unsettled him. He looked at Gendry, who wore a similar expression of concern. Both men had pledged to keep the realm safe, and the last thing they wanted was to see trouble spark from a single unknown warrior. The night ended without further incident, though rumor and gossip about the Black Knight spread like wildfire. The next morning brought the final day of justs, leading to the naming of a champion. The stands filled again, vibrant with excited spectators. Trumpets signaled the start. One by one, knights in colorful livery took their turns. Some soared to brief glory. Others fell ingloriously to the dust. The Knight of Woe was slated to face the best contenders for the final tilt. Shortly before midday, he appeared, riding his dark courser once more, drawing gasps and cheers. He faced a renowned knight from the Westerlands, a cousin to Lord Lannister, who was said to be undefeated in local tournaments. The two knights took their places at opposite ends of the list. At the blare of trumpets, they urged their horses forward, lances leveled. The impact was thunderous with splintering. The crowd held its breath. As expected, the Knight of Woe struck true, unhorsing the Lannister cousin in a single pass. The stands erupted in applause, overshadowed by murmurs of shock. He repeated this feat against two more challengers, a Blackwood from the Riverlands, a Valerion from the Crownlands, each time demonstrating almost inhuman precision. The final contest pitted him against a Dornish knight who had proven exceptionally skilled. The Dornishman managed to parry the Knight of Woe's lance on the first pass, but on the second, the Black Knight angled his weapon with uncanny timing, striking the Dornishman's shoulder and tumbling him clean off his saddle. The Knight of Woe had won. The crowd rose in a thunder of cheers and gasps. Trumpets pealed, signaling the victor. Down in the field, the herald declared the Black Knight the champion of the joust, awarding him a handsome purse of gold and the right to name a queen of love and beauty. Jon and Gendry tensed in the stands, watching for any sign of a threat. The Black Knight guided his horse before the king's viewing box. All eyes turned upward, including the hush of thousands, as if waiting for what he would do. Traditionally, a knight might remove his helm, accept the victor's laurel, and choose some lady to honor. But the Knight of Woe remained visor down, only a hint of the black cloth visible behind the steel. King Bran regarded him calmly from his raised seat. Tyrion, Davos, and Brienne stood behind the king, uncertain. After a stretched moment, Bran gave a simple nod. "You have he called, voice carrying across the hush. "The realm applauds your skill. Who do you name as your queen of love and beauty?" The Knight of Woe lifted his visor just enough that the black cloth beneath could be seen, obscuring his mouth. He bowed theatrically, then spoke, his voice reverberating. "I name no one." A collective ripple of puzzlement swept the stands. The Knight of Woe continued, "I seek not the adoration of any lady, nor do I come to woo favor. I come only to test the mettle of Westeros, to see if its vaunted knights remain strong in this new era of peace. My test is nearly complete." "Test?" murmured Gendry. "What does he mean by that?" Jon's pulse quickened. The Black Knight's presence might be a ruse for something else. He leaned forward, hand unconsciously resting on Longclaw's hilt. The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure whether to cheer or to question this unknown champion. The silence pressed. Then, with a sudden swift motion, the Black Knight guided his horse away from the royal box, spurred it into a gallop across the grounds, and disappeared behind the stands. A flurry of confusion followed. Guards scrambled, but by the time they reached the far side of the tourney grounds, he was gone. It was as if the Knight of Woe had melted into the city streets. Tyrion turned to Jon and Gendry. If we don't pursue him, we'll never learn the truth. But it might be a trap. Bran's voice, quiet but firm, rose from the dais. Search if you wish, but do not place the city in uproar. We must not let panic undermine everything we've built. Jon and Gendry needed no further prompting. With a gesture to a few loyal men, they mounted quickly and rode out from the tourney grounds, weaving through the throngs of confused spectators. Even Arya, who had been somewhere in the crowd, appeared suddenly at their side, cloak billowing. She said nothing, just fell in with them, and they knew better than to question her presence. Ghost ran alongside, a pale streak in the swirl of dust. They reached the city gates, but the Knight of Woe was nowhere in sight. The gate guards had not seen anyone on a dark horse pass. Possibly the champion had found another exit or dismounted to hide among the crowds. They split up, searching alleys and stable yards. The day's heat bore down, sweat trickling under their armor as they asked merchants, urchins, and travelers if they'd glimpsed a knight in black. No one admitted to such a sight. Some shrugged in disinterest, too busy with their own affairs to care about a fleeting night. By dusk, they regrouped, each with the same story. No sign, no clue. A frustration gnawed at them. The Knight of Woe had proven unstoppable in the lists, humbling some of the greatest knights in Westeros and then vanished without so much as an unmasking or explanation. They returned to the Red Keep, worn and irritated. Tyrion greeted them in the courtyard, lamps flickering in the twilight. No success, I take it? Gendry's face was grim. None. He must have planned this from the start, win the tournament, make a cryptic statement, then disappear. Jon dismounted, running a hand through his hair. It feels like more than vanity. Why go to such lengths just to test the mettle of Westeros? Who is behind it? Arya quietly slipped off her horse, scanning the courtyard. Maybe he's from across the sea. Or maybe it's someone we know, someone with a hidden agenda. Tyrion pursed his lips. Regardless, he's gone now. The king requests that you two not dwell on it too much. There are larger matters at hand. Though he did ask if you'd investigate discreetly, see if you can glean any intelligence. We don't want rumors spreading that some foreign champion can appear and vanish at will, humiliating our knights. Jon exhaled. Then we'll keep our ears open. But if he's truly gone, there may be nothing to find. The days after the tourney saw lords departing King's Landing. Jon and Gendry stayed a while longer at Bran's behest, discussing the Stepstones problem and the next steps for ensuring roads remained safe across the realm. Arya hovered on the edges of these discussions, restless as ever, unwilling to be confined by courtly routines. She slipped away at odd times, returning with tidbits of overheard rumors, none of which conclusively revealed the Knight of Woe's identity. One evening, as Jon prepared to retire to his chamber, he found Arya leaning against a balcony rail, looking out over the moonlit city. The flicker of torchlight danced across her face, hinting at her subdued mood. Jon joined her, the quiet hum of distant revelry drifting up from the lower wards. "What's on your mind?" he asked. She glanced at him, eyes reflecting the night's glow. "I'm thinking about leaving. This place, it's too full of old ghosts. And I have a hunger for what lies beyond the horizon. There are still uncharted lands, free cities to explore, places no Westerosi has seen." Jon's heart pinched with the old ache of family parted. "You only just returned. But I understand. I won't try to stop you." She smiled faintly. "I know. You never did. You always believed in letting me be who I needed to be. Sansa, too, in her own way. Gendry, well, I think he accepts it, though he sometimes forgets we can't all settle down to a life of rulership and duties." Jon placed a hand on hers. "If your path takes you away, at least let us know you're safe. Send ravens if you can. The realm might be at peace, but the world is vast and full of hidden perils." She nodded. "I will." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the bond of siblings unspoken but deeply felt. Jon considered telling her about his worry over the Knight of Woe, the sense that something threatened their hard-earned peace. But Arya, ever intuitive, likely guessed it already. Within a fortnight, the bustle from the tourney faded, replaced by the normal rhythms of the capital. Many pavilions were dismantled, knights returning to their holdings with new tales of triumph or defeat. House Baratheon Stark remained a topic of conversation in the city, though overshadowed somewhat by the exploits of the mysterious champion. King Bran thanked Jon and Gendry for their presence, impressed that the realm had seen a grand celebration free from bloodshed, save for the few bruises in the lists. As they prepared to depart, Bran granted them each tokens of esteem, new charters solidifying their authority to maintain joint patrols across the Stormlands and the North, clarifying that no lord had the right to hinder their efforts so long as they served the king's peace. Tyrion handed them the scrolls with a small flourish. Proof that your house is not just some bizarre experiment in unification. You're official in every sense. Gendry accepted his scroll, glancing at Jon with a slight grin. We'll keep these safe, and we'll keep our vow as always. Before they left, Jon had a final, quiet moment with Bran in a private chamber. Bran, seated by a window that overlooked the sea, turned his calm gaze upon Jon. You seem troubled, brother. Jon stood, arms crossed. It's this Knight of Woe. I can't shake the feeling that he's more than just an ambitious soldier looking for fame. The way he fought, it reminded me of something, though I can't say precisely what. Bran's strange, distant eyes flickered. I see glimpses, he said softly, but not always enough to form a clear vision. Be watchful, Jon. The realm is at peace, but peace is fragile. Sometimes, an unexpected threat can slip through the cracks, especially if it takes a form we don't anticipate. Jon nodded, fighting the chill down his spine. We'll be ready. With that, Jon rejoined Gendry in the courtyard, where their horses were saddled. A small escort of Northern and Stormlander knights stood by. Arya was nowhere to be seen, having likely left already on some path of her own choosing. Tyrion offered a last farewell. Davos gave them a friendly salute, and Ser Brienne promised to keep an eye out for any sign of further disturbances. They rode out of King's Landing at dawn, the rising sun gilding the city walls behind them. Gendry looked back only once. Jon kept his gaze forward, Ghost trotting beside him. Their journey home would split at some point, Gendry returning to the Stormlands, Jon to the north. Yet they traveled together for now, exchanging thoughts on how to improve the roads, how to fortify small keeps along the major trade routes, how to ensure that the realm's newfound prosperity continued. A week into their journey, they paused at a large inn near the borders of the Reach. The courtyard was bustling with merchants, sellswords, and travelers. Jon dismounted, grateful for a chance to rest. Gendry spoke briefly with the stablemaster to arrange lodging for their mounts. The sky was gray with impending rain, a cool breeze rattling the shutters. As Jon moved toward the inn's main door, Ghost at his side, he sensed a presence behind him. Instinct had been honed in war. He turned swiftly, hand brushing the hilt of long claw. There, standing at the edge of the courtyard, was a figure clad in a plain cloak. For a heartbeat, Jon thought it might be the Knight of Woe. But this person was shorter, the cloak muddy at the hem, no armor visible. Jon eased his grip on the sword. Can I help you? The figure stepped closer, lifting the hood. A woman's face, pale and angular, with silver blonde hair braided tight, came into view. Her eyes were an intense blue, and a faint scar ran across her cheek. She regarded Jon silently for a moment before speaking in a low, measured voice. I've traveled a great distance to find the men who lead House Baratheon Stark. Jon glanced at Gendry, who had just finished with the stablemaster and was walking over. You found them, Jon answered, cautious. I'm Jon Snow. This is Gendry Baratheon. She nodded, lips pressed tight. I come with information about the Knight of Woe and what he seeks. Jon's pulse quickened. Gendry stepped up beside him, scanning the woman. Who are you? And why would you help us? The woman exhaled. My name is Riella Waters. I was once in service to a certain lineage in Essos. I've seen things that point to a hidden threat rising from the east. The Knight of Woe is part of it, though he may be only the first. They mean to test the realm's defenses. Your new house stands in their path. Jon and Gendry exchanged a sharp look. Memories of war flared in Jon's mind, foreign armies, secret machinations, Daenerys Targaryen's arrival. What threat do you speak of? Jon asked. Riella's eyes flicked to the inn door, then back to Jon and Gendry. It's not safe here. Too many ears. Grant me a moment of privacy, and I'll tell you what I know. But I warn you, it involves shadows from across the narrow sea and an ancient grudge that might reignite the flames of war if left unchecked. A rumble of thunder underscored her words as the sky's gloom deepened. Jon cast a quick glance around, noting how random travelers milled about with no apparent interest. But the wind carried enough voices that eavesdropping would be easy. He inclined his head. Very well. We'll speak in private. They led her to a small side room off the inn's common area, paying a few extra coins to the innkeeper for discretion. The chamber was cramped, lit by a single lamp and the glow of embers in the fireplace. Ghost settled near the door, watchful. Gendry stood near the window, arms crossed, while Jon took a seat at a low table. Riella Waters lowered her hood, revealing hair that gleamed with a faint Targaryen silver under the lamplight, a detail that immediately set Jon's nerves on edge. He braced himself, trying not to let old wounds reopen. You mentioned you served a lineage in Essos, he said carefully. Which lineage? She took a moment before replying, her gaze flicking between them. Daenerys Targaryen's cause had sympathizers in Essos. Many dissolved after her fall, but some refused to relinquish the dream of Targaryen rule. Not all Targaryens died. Some lines remain, or so the whispers say, and they yearn to reclaim what they see as rightfully theirs. Jon's jaw clenched. Gendry's eyes hardened. If that's true, Gendry said, then their challenge should be directed at King Bran. Why come at us? Riella tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Because you are the embodiment of a new Westeros, one that rejects the old claims of blood and birthright in favor of alliances built on trust and necessity. House Baratheon Stark is a living symbol that a Targaryen claim can be set aside. Many in Essos who still worship the memory of dragons see you as the greatest obstacle. Jon's heart thudded. The idea that Targaryen loyalists might have survived overseas, growing in secret, shouldn't have surprised him. Daenerys had once had the support of many in the East. You're saying they sent this Knight of Woe to test us? To see if our knights are strong? Yes, she confirmed. But it was more than that. They wanted to see how the realm would react to an unknown, unbeatable force. If the realm panics, if it shows division, then these hidden factions will exploit that. They believe there's still a chance to reassert Targaryen dominion, especially if they can frame it as the rightful blood of the dragon overthrowing a crippled boy king and a house that's half-bastard line. Forgive my bluntness. Gendry scowled but nodded curtly. We've heard worse. Riella pressed her lips together. I left them because I realized they're not seeking justice, but conquest, the same cycle that has already cost thousands of lives. I had hoped to find a new Westeros that had learned from its mistakes. That's why I'm here, to warn you. Jon's thoughts whirled. You said you have proof. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. Carefully, she extracted a scrap of parchment covered in unfamiliar sigils and a seal of dark blue wax. This is a cipher. It speaks of a plan to land a force somewhere along the southern coast when they have enough support and to reveal a supposed heir of House Targaryen who would rally the disaffected. The Knight of Woe was step one, building the myth. Jon's head buzzed with the weight of it. Could there truly be another Targaryen heir? Or was it another pretender like the many false Daeneryses or false Aegons who had cropped up over the years? Either way, a movement bent on restoring the Targaryen line by force could plunge the realm into war again. Gendry drew a slow breath. If this is true, we need to get word to King Bran at once. Jon agreed. And to the other lords paramount, so no one is caught unawares. We have to show unity or these would-be conquerors might succeed in sowing chaos. Riella nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Help me and I'll do whatever I can to assist. I don't want to see another war. I've seen enough in Essos, slavers, mercenaries, tyrants. I thought Daenerys would break the wheel, but it broke her instead. I won't watch more innocents die for a throne. Outside, thunder rolled again. Rain began to patter against the roof, the first drops of a gathering storm. Jon stood, pacing, the tension coiled inside him. If we do this, we need to move fast, but also carefully. We can't let rumors run wild. People still remember the devastation of Dragonfire. Gendry clenched his fists. Then we'd best gather our trusted men. We'll need to ride south again, or send ravens, or both. The last thing we want is to ignore this until an army lands on our shores. Jon halted, turning to Riella. You'll come with us then? She bowed her head in assent. I will. I know I might not be trusted easily, given my bloodline. Waters is a name given to bastards in the Crownlands, and my hair betrays a Targaryen link somewhere in my ancestry. But I'm not loyal to them. I came to give you this warning. Jon shared a glance with Gendry. Their entire vow, the forging of Baratheon Stark, was about preventing more war. Now they stood on the threshold of a new threat rising from across the sea. He felt that old heaviness settle in his chest, responsibility, the call to fight for peace. At least this time, he wasn't alone. Gendry was at his side, and the realm might rally if they handled matters correctly. The torch in the fireplace guttered, casting wavering shadows on the walls. Rain drummed steadily on the inn's roof. Jon nodded at last. We trust you enough to hear you out fully. We'll confirm what you've told us, gather allies. If this threat is real, we'll do what we must. Riella exhaled slowly, a hint of relief in her posture. Thank you. Gendry turned to Jon. We'll send messages to Sansa, to Storm's End, and back to Bran. But how do we keep the realm calm? If word spreads that Targaryens might return, some might rally to them, or panic, or both. Jon gripped the edge of the table. We keep it quiet until we know more. Then, if needed, we make a united stand. No more secret claims, no more unstoppable knights riding in attorneys. We meet this head-on as one house, one realm. Riella lowered herself onto a stool, exhaustion in her eyes. I can guide you to where they might land, or at least show you the vantage points they'd need. But time is short. If they suspect I've defected, they may accelerate their plans. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the sky in a sudden burst. Thunder followed, rattling the windows. Jon stared at the shadows dancing across the wooden wall, heart steadying with resolve. He recalled the vow he'd made with Gendry under the eyes of the realm, to protect the living, to uphold peace. The war with the dead had taught him the price of complacency. The conquest of King's Landing had shown him the horror of letting fanaticism reign unchecked. We won't wait, Jon said at last. We ride for Storm's End first. The southern coast is closer to the Stormlands. We can gather what forces we have, then coordinate with King Bran and the other lords. If this menace truly means to land an army, the Stormlands might be the first line of defense. Gendry reached over, clasping Jon's shoulder. Then let's be about it. Jon looked between him and Riella. He saw in their eyes the reflection of his own purpose, to prevent another cataclysm, to spare the realm another descent into chaos. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they formed a plan, 3 people bound by chance and necessity, determined to keep the fragile peace from shattering. So began a new chapter in the uneasy story of a realm still healing. The wolf and the stag, now warned of a threat lurking across the sea, would face an enemy that wore the cloak of old ambitions and whispered the promise of a lost dynasty's return. If House Baratheon Stark had been forged to defend the realm from the shadows of the past, then this was its trial by fire. Once again, Jon Snow and Gendry Baratheon would stand side by side, carrying a banner that promised unity, carrying the hopes of a battered yet resilient Westeros. The storm outside was but an echo of the storm to come, and they would meet it, heads unbowed, hearts unbroken, for the sake of a tomorrow free from the shackles of old claims and endless wars. Jon Snow stood at the window of the cramped private chamber, listening to rain pelt the inn's rooftop. The low hum of voices and clinking tankards from the common room below seemed distant, blurred by his thoughts. Thunder rumbled, echoing through the rafters. In the flickering light of a single lantern, Gendry Baratheon was leaning over a small table with Riella Waters going over the scrap of parchment she had shown them. Riella's silver-blonde hair caught the lamplight whenever she moved. It was impossible to ignore the subtle Targaryen cast to her features. A reminder that, though she claimed to have defected, her blood tied her to the very lineage that might threaten the peace Jon and Gendry had labored so hard to uphold. Jon drew a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. The words she had spoken rang again in his mind. Targaryen loyalists, hidden away in Essos, seeking to resurrect old claims. The Knight of Woe was only a piece of it, a living test of Westeros's readiness for war, or perhaps a seed of doubt meant to dislodge King Bran's authority. Jon could see the path that lay ahead, complicated, perilous, and all too likely to end in blood. Yet what choice did they have? House Baratheon Stark had formed with one goal above all, to stop the realm from tearing itself apart again. Riella tapped the parchment, her voice subdued. These are coded references to certain ports in the disputed lands east of Volantis. From there, men affiliated with the so-called rightful Targaryen cause have been gathering. They're not large in number, at least not yet, but they have gold from old supporters and may hire sellswords. It's enough to make trouble if Westeros is unprepared. Gendry ran a hand over his short beard, frowning. Any mention of a name? Someone who claims to be a Targaryen heir? Riella shook her head. Not explicitly. I've heard whispers of a woman calling herself Visenya, a man styling himself Aegon VII, but it could be empty posturing, like those false pretenders that occasionally crop up across the sea. Truth or lie, they'll push the story they need. A hero rising from the ashes, or a hidden scion neglected by the realm, whatever will rally the discontented. Jon pushed away from the window, stepping closer to them. Regardless of the claimant's identity, the danger is the same. They'll exploit uncertainty. If the realm sees a figure cloaked in dragon mystique, some might flock to it out of old loyalties or desperation. Gendry glanced at Jon. King Bran must be told at once, but Storm's End lies closer to where any invasion might land, likely along the southern coasts. We can dispatch ravens tonight and ride there ourselves come first light. The king can coordinate a broader defense while we do everything possible to secure the Stormlands. Riella exhaled, a tension in her shoulders easing now that her burden was shared. Whatever you plan, I'm with you. I've burned my bridges in Essos. I might still have friends in certain free cities, but returning would be suicide. Jon studied her. She wore a simple cloak and traveling clothes, no armor. There was a resolute tilt to her chin, but also a sadness in her eyes as though haunted by choices that had led her here. He recalled the countless times he'd encountered individuals forced into roles they hadn't chosen. In that sense, she reminded him of himself. Perhaps she was genuine, or perhaps this was a ruse. But for now, they needed her information, so they had little option but to trust her provisionally. Then let's prepare, Jon said, keeping his voice low despite the storm's din. We won't linger in this any longer than we must. I'll have our knights alerted and the horses readied. Gendry nodded. Aye. I'll talk with the men, make sure we can depart at first light. Jon moved toward the door, Ghost rising from his place near the threshold. Even with the thunder overhead, the direwolf's ears were pricked, alert to every change in tone or footstep. Jon opened the door, stepping into the narrow hallway. A few drunken patrons from the common room glanced curiously his way as he passed, but he ignored them. He found the soldier in charge of their small escort, a Stormlander named Ser Colston, and explained the situation with measured words. Colston stiffened, eyes flicking left and right, but expressed readiness to ride out whenever commanded. Throughout the remainder of the night, they made careful plans. Riella wrote out coded messages referencing the cipher on her scrap of parchment so that King Bran's spy masters would confirm she was telling the truth. Gendry penned letters to Storm's End, instructing the Castellan to gather loyal knights and prepare the coastal watchtowers. Jon wrote to Sansa in Winterfell, urging vigilance in the north, though he suspected an invasion would strike the southern shores if it came at all. Better that the entire realm be on alert. By the time they snatched a few hours of restless sleep, it felt as though the night had just begun. Dawn came gray and bleak, the storm clouds still hanging overhead. At least half a dozen. Could be more lurking beyond the cape. A hush fell over the courtyard. Jon's heartbeat thudded. The moment they dreaded was here, or close. Gendry knelt to help the rider stand. Did you see banners? Any sign of who they are? The man shook his head. No banners that we recognized. Small ships, but not fishing craft, looked sturdier. Armed men on deck. They anchored near a secluded cove. I rode hard to warn you. Jon exchanged a grim glance with Gendry. Where exactly? The messenger gave the name of a small, rocky inlet about 2 days' ride south, near the border with the Dornish marches. Gendry stood, eyes flashing with urgent resolve. Ser Jobel, gather the men. We're riding out tonight. Ser Colston, prepare 24 knights and enough supplies for a forced march. Jon turned to a guard. Fetch Riella. Quickly. Tension crackled through Storm's End like lightning. Within the hour, an expeditionary force was ready, 30 knights, plus a handful of archers and support staff, along with Jon, Gendry, and Riella. They rode out under torchlight, determined not to let these unknown arrivals gain a foothold. The windy roads and rocky terrain would slow them, but speed was essential. All through that night, they pressed on. Ghost trotted alongside Jon's horse, silent and vigilant. Riella rode near the front as well, her face set. Whenever they paused to water the horses, she would murmur about how the cove might be used by smaller ships, how someone from Essos would know to anchor there to avoid large port taxes. It seemed these loyalists had done their homework. By midday of the next day, the party was weary, but there was no time to rest. They paused only briefly to distribute rations. Finally, late in the afternoon of the second day, they neared the region the messenger had described. The sea glinted in the distance, framed by jagged cliffs and rolling slopes dotted with sparse trees. The wind carried a faint tang of salt. Gendry halted the group in a small hollow out of sight from the coastline. Ser Colston, he said quietly, take 10 knights and scout the area. If there are men camped near the cove, observe their numbers. Don't engage unless forced to. The rest of us will wait for your signal. Colston saluted and led his contingent off through the brush. Time crawled. Jon and Gendry dismounted, checking the straps on their armor, ensuring their swords were ready. Riella stood by a rocky outcrop, scanning the horizon. Her presence lent an extra edge of gravity to the situation. They were about to discover if her warnings of Targaryen loyalists were indeed coming to fruition. Soon, Colston returned, breath quick. My lords, there's a small encampment in the dunes by the cove, maybe 20 men in sight, though more might be hidden. We saw 3 ships anchored just offshore. They're offloading crates, possibly supplies or weapons. Another 3 ships might be around the bend. Hard to see from the bluff. Jon glanced at Gendry. Doesn't sound like a massive army, but enough to cause trouble if they've come with ill intent. Gendry's jaw set. We'll circle around, approach from higher ground. Cut off their route inland if they try to flee. We need at least 1 prisoner alive for questioning. Ser Colston nodded. Yes, my lord. They advanced cautiously, leading horses through scrubby vegetation so as not to announce their presence with thunderous hooves. The final approach required them to dismount, tying the reins to stunted trees. Ghost padded ahead with quiet ease, occasionally returning to Jon's side. The party spread out in a battle line, creeping closer to the dunes. Before long, Jon caught sight of smoke from a small campfire. The briny breeze carried snatches of conversation in a language he didn't fully recognize, perhaps a dialect of Valyrian or Bravosi. He crouched behind a rise of sand, Gendry beside him. Over the lip of the dune, they spied about 20 men milling around, some wearing mismatched armor. A few had strips of cloth around their arms, dark blue or black. Could it be the same color as the Knight of Woe's cloth? Hard to tell from here. Offshore, 3 ships bobbed in the cove, their sails furled. A couple of small skiffs were pulled up on the sand, loaded with wooden crates. 1 crate had burst open, revealing swords of foreign make. Jon exchanged a quick look with Gendry. This had all the hallmarks of a preliminary landing. Precisely what Riella had warned them about. From behind another dune, Riella edged forward. She gestured to Jon, pointing at a tall man near the beach who wore better armor than the rest, his posture commanding. Jon nodded. Likely the leader. They had to isolate or capture him before he fled back to the ships. Gendry signaled the group. They positioned themselves, archers knocking arrows, knights preparing to charge. A hush of anticipation settled. Then, with a single shouted command, they sprang from hiding. The Stormlander knights let out a collective roar, bounding over the dunes. Arrows zipped through the salt air. Jon rushed down the slope, longclaw in hand, Ghost sprinting at his side, the direwolf's white fur stark against the sand. The invaders scrambled in alarm. A few drew swords or pikes. Some tried to haul crates toward the skiffs, shouting curses or half-formed orders. The tall leader barked something in a foreign tongue. Jon spotted about 5 or 6 men forming a defensive line around him, brandishing steel that gleamed in the late afternoon light. Gendry, armed with a warhammer, charged into the fray from another angle, smashing aside a spear thrust. The man behind the spear fell to the sand with a cry, blood staining his tunic. Knights behind Gendry engaged others who attempted to fight back. Steel clanged, men shouted, the surf rumbled. It was a chaotic, swift confrontation. Jon found himself fending off 2 adversaries. One lunged with a curved sword. The other tried to flank him with a short spear. Jon parried the sword and sidestepped the spear, slicing upward with long claw. His blade was Valyrian steel, and it cut through the spear shaft as though it were little more than dry kindling. The man stumbled back, and Jon struck him down with a follow-up blow. The other attacker tried to slash at Jon's side, but Ghost lunged, clamping powerful jaws on the man's arm. The scream ended quickly when Jon brought Longclaw down in a clean stroke. Gendry, meanwhile, clashed with a tough, broad-shouldered fighter who wielded a battle-axe. The man roared, swinging overhead, but Gendry caught the axe handle on his warhammer's haft, twisted, and slammed his foe's chest with a brutal strike. Armor buckled under the blow. The man dropped, gasping for breath he'd never quite catch. Within moments, half the invaders were down or wounded. The rest broke into ragged groups, some racing toward the skiffs, others running inland. The Stormlander knights gave chase. Jon scanned for the tall leader, heart pounding. There, the man was backing away, shouting in Essos at 3 of his subordinates. One subordinate tossed him a shield. They began a desperate retreat toward the water, perhaps hoping to board a skiff and row back to the ships. Jon sprinted in pursuit, Ghost at his side. Gendry flanked from the left. Riella appeared from the right, sword in hand. Though no master fighter, she'd armed herself as best she could. The tall leader's eyes flicked between the 3 approaching threats, calculating. A moment later, he lunged at Jon, presumably judging him the greatest danger. Jon met the attack with a side parry, feeling the shock of impact shudder through his arm. The man pressed forward with surprising skill, forcing Jon back a step in the sand. Gritting his teeth, Jon twisted away, deflecting another cut and slashing toward the man's leg. The blow connected, drawing blood. The leader hissed, staggering slightly. Then Gendry's warhammer swung in a downward arc. The man barely got his shield up in time, and the force of the impact sent him stumbling to his knees. Before the man could regain balance, Riella darted in. She placed her blade at his throat, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Yield," she commanded in the common tongue, though her accent sharpened the word. He glared up at her, face twisting with anger. Blood from his leg wound trickled into the sand. Gendry and Jon stood on either side, weapons ready. For a moment it seemed he might try a last attack. Then, with a ragged curse, he tossed aside his sword, breathing hard. The skiffs had already begun pushing off the beach. A couple of the enemy men paddled frantically, ignoring the shouts of those left behind. Farther out, the anchored ships sounded horns, signaling something. Perhaps a retreat. Jon met Gendry's gaze. They had no means to chase the ships at sea. For now, capturing this leader, and whoever else they could, was the best outcome. Ser Colston and the knights finished off the last of the resistance or took them prisoner. All told, about a dozen of the invaders lay dead, another 6 or 7 wounded or captured. The remainder escaped on the skiffs or fled inland, though the knights were in pursuit of those. Riella kept her blade at the tall leader's throat as Gendry removed the man's helmet. He had dark hair, tan skin, and a sneer that twisted his lips. Jon crouched beside him, raising Longclaw in warning. "Tell us who you are and what your purpose is here. If you cooperate, you might live." The man spat in the sand, silent. Then Riella spoke a few sentences in Valyrian, her tone cold. The man's eyes flicked to her, startled. He responded in the same language, spitting out a string of words that made Riella's jaw tense. Finally, she switched to the common tongue for Jon and Gendry's benefit. "He says he answers to the true dragon across the sea, who will claim Westeros in fire and blood." Jon felt a chill, memories of Daenerys' final rampage searing across his mind. Fire and blood. Always the same words. Ask him how many are coming and what they hope to achieve. She relayed the question in Valyrian. The man narrowed his eyes, letting out a bitter laugh as he responded. Riella's brow furrowed deeper. "He claims they are but the first wave, that more will follow. He boasted that soon we will see the strength that remains in the east, that the king in King's Landing is a pretender, and that House Baratheon Stark will be torn down as traitors to the rightful Targaryen line." Gendry growled, warhammer still in hand. "Traitors? My father ended their tyranny. Jon ended the last attempt to resurrect it. And still they come." Jon's voice was grim. "We need to question him further, but not here on the sand." He looked at Riella. "Tell him he'll be taken to Storm's End. If he values his life, he'll speak there." She conveyed the message. The leader sneered again, though the flash of fear in his eyes betrayed a less certain bravado. 2 knights lifted him, forced him to hobble on his wounded leg. Another pair advanced with rope, binding his arms behind his back. The rest of the captured men were similarly secured. Jon cast one last look out to sea, where the distant ships were weighed anchor, presumably preparing to depart. A fruitless pursuit with no warships at hand. The first skirmish had ended with only partial success, and there was no telling how soon the next might come. By the time they cleaned up the beach collecting swords, checking the crates for contraband, twilight approached. Inside the crates, they found carefully packed blades, short spears, pieces of chain mail, and casks of arrowheads. No sign of a Targaryen banner, though. The men who had died wore mismatched gear, some obviously Sel's words from Essos. This was no large army, but a small infiltration unit. Jon stood with Gendry at the water's edge, the wind cold against his face. "They're testing us," Jon said quietly. "It's just like the Knight of Woe, but now on a larger scale. They want to see if we'll crumble or if we're as unified as we claim." Gendry rested his warhammer on his shoulder, gaze on the horizon. "We'll show them we won't crumble. We'll strengthen our defenses here. But we need the king's help. We might need ships of our own." Jon nodded. "We'll send ravens as soon as we reach the nearest roost. In the meantime, let's get these prisoners back to Storm's End and see what they'll tell us. We can't let them slip away." They organized their force, binding the captives and leaving a small team behind to watch for stragglers. The journey back was slower, burdened by the injured and the prisoners. Still, they made steady progress through the night, stopping only briefly to rest. Gendry, in his capacity as Lord, tried to keep morale up among the knights. Jon took on the role he knew best, patrolling the column, ensuring no ambush could catch them unawares. Riella, for her part, drew quiet stares but took them in stride, occasionally speaking softly with the prisoners in Valyrian to glean scraps of information. Ghost prowled the flanks, an ever-present guardian. They reached Storm's End at midday, battered by weariness but alive. Servants came running at the sight of the wounded. The prisoners were hauled into a secure cell block deep within the fortress, under heavy guard. Gendry and Jon ordered the tall leader kept separate and promised they would interrogate him personally once he'd had time to realize his precarious situation. Ravens were dispatched to King Bran, Sansa, Tyrion, and any other allies who should be informed that the rumored invasion was no mere rumor. Only then did Jon and Gendry allow themselves a moment's respite. In a private antechamber, they removed their armor, washed away the grime of travel, and shared a simple meal of bread and stew. Riella joined them after cleaning up, her hair still damp from a quick rinsing. The conversation was subdued. "They will come again," she said at last, setting aside her half-eaten bread. "This was just a taste. Perhaps they expected to find you unprepared." Gendry nodded. "They found the opposite. But if more are on the way." Jon rubbed the back of his neck. "We'll hold them here. Even if they land in multiple spots, they can't stand against the realm united." Riella's gaze flicked to Jon. "You say that with conviction, but I've seen factions in Essos that hold grudges. They're led by men or women who believe it's their sacred right to rule. They might not yield easily." Jon's voice was quiet. "Then we'll show them, as I had to show Daenerys in the end, that no birthright is worth the slaughter of innocents. House Baratheon Stark will stand. King Bran will stand." They parted ways, each burdened by the reality of what loomed. The hours slipped past, and as evening fell, Jon ventured to the cell block with Gendry. The corridor was dimly lit by torches. Guards stood at intervals, hands on sword hilts. Outside the tall leader's cell, 2 knights flanked the iron-bound door. They saluted Gendry, then unlatched the door and swung it open. Inside, the cell was cramped and smelled of damp stone. The leader sat chained to a ring in the floor, leg wrapped in a hasty bandage. He lifted his head when Jon and Gendry entered, his expression twisted between defiance and pain. A single torch in a bracket cast flickering shadows across the walls. Jon spoke first. "We mean to ask questions and we expect answers. Resist and you'll rot in here until the end of your days. Cooperate and perhaps there's a chance you won't hang." The man spat on the floor, glaring. Gendry folded his arms. "He speaks the common tongue, yes? Or shall we fetch Riella to translate?" The man's lip curled. "I understand enough," he said, accented but passable. "It doesn't matter what I say. More are coming." Jon studied him, measuring each word. "Who leads them?" He just sneered. "Who is this true dragon you serve?" Gendry pressed. "Is it a man? A woman? A pretender? Where do they hail from?" The man let out a soft, mocking laugh. "You fear him, that much is clear. And you should. The Knight of Woe was just the herald. He proved your knights can be beaten. We were the next step." Jon forced his voice to remain calm. "Your next step failed. We crushed your landing party. Now your ships are fleeing, and you're in chains. Doesn't sound like success." A flash of anger darkened the man's eyes, but he tried to hide it. He shifted, grimacing at the pain in his leg. "One battle doesn't decide a war. When the true dragon lands in full, House Baratheon Stark will be a footnote in history. The Iron Throne belongs to the blood of old Valyria, not to cripples, usurpers, or northern bastards." Gendry's hand twitched near his warhammer, but he contained himself. Jon took a step closer, letting the torchlight fall on his face. "I was raised a Stark. My father was Eddard Stark, an honorable man who would not bow to tyranny. You talk of old Valyria, but that's gone. Burned by dragons. Your new cause leads only to more death." The man said nothing, though a flicker of uncertainty passed across his expression. Jon exhaled, turning aside slightly. "We'll have you fed, given basic treatment. But if you refuse to talk beyond threats, we'll leave you here in the dark." After a long silence, the prisoner muttered something that sounded like an Essosi curse. Finally, he looked up, meeting Jon's gaze. "A man in Myr, a cell named Essaro, he's been hiring crews, forging swords. Funding comes from across the sea, some enclave of Targaryen loyalists enlists. We were told the true dragon would reveal himself soon, or herself, no one's certain. Only that we must sow discord now." Jon latched onto those words. "Liss. So that's where the money's from. That's all you know." The man shrugged, wincing. "We were told to land here, establish a foothold, and wait for more. That's it." "Who gave the order?" Gendry asked. He grimaced, then said, "A black-helmed knight with a cloth covering his face. He visited the ships weeks ago, told us how the new House of Wolf and Stag was an affront to true kingship. He said once we established ourselves, we'd be joined by more men, more knights, and maybe a dragon. The man scoffed as if uncertain about that last detail. I never saw the knight's face, but he had a sword that looked like pure black glass. He said we'd know him by the name of Woe. Jon's pulse hammered. So the Knight of Woe was indeed active, orchestrating more than just a theatrical performance at the tourney. He was part of the infiltration plan, possibly a crucial link between these loyalists and whoever styled themselves the next Targaryen heir. This man's mention of a black glass sword might be figurative or literal, but it aligned with the knight's ominous persona. Gendry and Jon exchanged a glance. Jon leaned in. Why come here first? Why not aim for King's Landing if dethroning Bran is your goal? The prisoner exhaled. We were told the north is too far and too loyal to the Boy King and King's Landing is guarded. But the Stormlands, some said you might not be as strong as you claim. That you're new in your station, that lords might chafe under your rule. We were told some might join us if given reason. Jon's face hardened. Gendry's fists clenched. They thought wrong, Gendry growled, but the man just smirked, apparently drawing some satisfaction from the tension he caused. Jon pulled Gendry aside. We have enough for now. If we press him further, he might retreat into silence. Gendry nodded. They stepped back from the prisoner, who watched them warily. We'll have men question you again later, Jon told him in a clipped tone. If you're smart, you'll help us stop this madness. You might even walk free one day. If not, well, traitors face the sword. With that, they left the cell, the iron door clanging shut behind them. The corridor felt stifling, the air thick with the promise of conflict. Gendry wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at Jon. At least we know more. Lists, that means wealthy backers. Possibly even sells word companies from the free cities. The Knight of Woe is real. They're planning something bigger. Jon gritted his teeth. We'll have to rally the realm. The king can't ignore this now that we have proof of an organized threat. We should also reach out to potential allies at sea, maybe the Iron Islands, maybe the fleets of the Reach. We can't let them land more men uncontested. Before they could discuss further, a guard approached at a quick pace. My lords, Lady Riella requests your presence in the map room. She says it's urgent. They followed without delay. In the map room, a chamber with a large table draped in parchment, Riella stood studying a coastal chart, brow furrowed. A few knights hovered nearby, unsure how to respond to her clipped instructions. When she saw Jon and Gendry enter, she let out a breath of relief. I just received word from one of your scouts, she said without preamble, resting a hand on the map. There's another cove about a day's sail south of here. He's certain he saw ships hugging the coast, heading that way. Possibly more infiltration attempts. They must be feeling out the entire shoreline. Gendry crossed his arms, glancing at the lines on the map. Which cove? She tapped a spot near a place known as Windbreak Bay. Here. It's shallow but large enough for small vessels to land. If they do, they might slip inland to gather supplies or find any lords gullible enough to side with them. Jon's frustration mounted. We can't chase every rumor along the entire coast. We don't have enough men to split up indefinitely. We need a fleet or a bigger army. Riella lifted her gaze to meet his. Unless you can get them to talk about where the main landing might be or who's leading it, you'll keep playing whack-a-mole. A war of small landings and retreats. They'll exhaust you. He knew she was right. Gendry let out a sharp breath. We'll do what we can with the men we have, but we must press King Bran for immediate support. If that means pushing the crown's resources, so be it. Jon looked around the chamber. Each wall was lined with shelves of old records, treatises on storms and siege histories. He thought of the old days, how quickly armies could appear, how cunning men could exploit divides. They had fought so hard for a realm that recognized House Baratheon Stark. Now they had to fight again, this time for the realm itself, against those who insisted on resurrecting the Targaryen dream. He tightened his fists at his sides, recalling the devastation in King's Landing, the screams echoing through his memory. We'll coordinate with the king, Jon said, voice steadier than he felt. But for now, we handle these landings ourselves. Riella, do you have any insight into how quickly these loyalists can grow their force? She pursed her lips and thought. They're well-funded, but not enormous. They rely on stealth and turning local sentiment. The Knight of Woe's success in the tourney was meant to kindle fear, maybe draw out Targaryen sympathizers. If they can gather enough sellswords and reawaken old loyalties, they'll try a bigger landing. Maybe at Storm's End itself, or a major port city in the Reach. They might even attempt infiltration near Dorne if they think the Dornish might resent the crown. Gendry shot Jon a worried look. We have to keep an eye on our own lords, too. If even a fraction harbor a grudge or are open to a new claim, it could sabotage us from within. Jon nodded grimly. Let's set watchers among the lords. Quietly. We can't accuse anyone without cause, but we can't afford to be naive. The hours rolled on as they laid out layered plans, dividing tasks among knights, scribes, and stewards. Ravens flew in and out carrying coded messages. The entire fortress throbbed with urgency, but also with a sense of purpose. House Baratheon Stark was fulfilling its reason for existence, bridging the realm's factions and providing a bulwark against chaos. In the days that followed, several more sightings of small ships trickled in. Each time, Gendry dispatched riders and knights to investigate. Some turned out to be legitimate traders or fishers, while others fled at the first hint of confrontation. A few small skirmishes took place along secluded beaches with minimal losses. No major invasion fleet materialized yet, but the pattern was unmistakable. These loyalists were probing, learning the coastline, seeking potential weak points. Meanwhile, the tall leader languished in his cell, refusing further cooperation beyond what they'd already pried out of him. The men captured alongside him were similarly tight-lipped, though occasionally Riella coaxed a scrap of information by conversing in Valyrian or promising them better treatment. She learned that the next phase depended on signals from across the sea, rendezvous points that would be communicated somehow. All of it pointed to a larger conspiracy, but not one ready to pounce in full force just yet. Jon felt the strain. Each morning, he woke before dawn, checking with the watch captains, reading fresh dispatches, organizing search parties. Gendry did likewise, juggling the political side, ensuring local lords remained loyal, smoothing out tensions, collecting resources. They worked together seamlessly, a testament to their shared leadership. The men followed them with respect, for they saw how fiercely both lord and friend were willing to protect these lands. One afternoon, a raven arrived from King Bran. The scroll bore Tyrion's writing, explaining that the king had directed the crown's few war galleys to the Blackwater Bay for readiness. Lord Davos Seaworth had been tasked with exploring alliances with the Iron Islands for additional naval support. Yara Greyjoy was uncertain but open to negotiation. The message also warned that the crown could not muster a full-scale response overnight. The realm was still healing from previous wars with limited finances and manpower. Tyrion urged caution, pleading for Gendry and Jon to keep the crown updated on every development. Jon let the scroll unroll on the table. Riella stood nearby scanning it. "Not the swift support we'd hoped for," she remarked. Gendry frowned. "We can't blame them. The king's resources are stretched. But if the main threat emerges, we need them to act decisively." Jon's gaze drifted to the window. Storm's End perched on the frontier of land and sea, a shield for the rest of Westeros. "We'll hold until they can send more. We have no other choice." The day ended with more scouting. Jon led a small band of knights to check rumors of suspicious riders near the southwestern roads. They found only a ragtag group of traveling performers battered by weather. With every false alarm, tension grew because they knew sooner or later a real threat would appear. That night, the wind raged again. Rain lashed the fortress, rattling shutters. In a dim corridor, illuminated by torches guttering in the draft, Jon encountered Riella. She wore a long cloak pinned with a simple brooch. She started slightly when she saw him, though quickly recovered her composure. "Apologies," she murmured. "I was just wandering thinking." Jon inclined his head. "No need for apology. Storm's End is labyrinthine. Easy to get lost." She glanced away, then spoke quietly. "All this, these endless checks, skirmishes, waiting for the next wave, reminds me of how I felt in Essos, drifting between camps of sellswords and exiled lords. Always on edge, never certain if an enemy might strike. It wears on the soul." Jon nodded, remembering his own experiences on the wall and during the war. "It does. But we endure for those who depend on us. Peace rarely comes without a fight." Riella turned her face toward the faint light of a torch. Shadows accentuated the slight curve of her cheek, the Targaryen silver in her hair. "I wonder if there's a path that avoids war entirely. If your king could negotiate with these loyalists, or if that's just a fool's dream." Jon considered it. "We're willing to talk if they come in peace. But their entire premise is that only Targaryens should rule. They reject the decision of the Great Council that raised Bran to the throne. I doubt negotiations are possible unless they yield that point." She sighed. "You're right. Zealots rarely compromise. And in Essos, the promise of restoring Targaryen glory is an obsession for some. I don't think they'll talk as long as they believe there's a chance of conquering Westeros." Jon studied her in the flickering gloom. "Riella, do you fear they'll come for you as a traitor?" Her eyes flicked to him, then dropped. "Yes. I was a messenger and a scribe for them at times, entrusted with tasks. When I realized they meant to continue the cycle of bloodshed, I fled. But if they find me, they'll kill me without hesitation." Jon's voice softened. You're safe here for as long as we stand. And we will stand. She bowed her head. Thank you. I only hope it's enough. They parted ways, each retreating to uneasy rest as the storm howled outside. Morning dawned heavy with mist. Gendry had barely started his day's routine when another urgent message arrived. Watchers on the southwestern watchtower had spotted sails near the horizon. By the time the knights arrived to investigate, they found no trace, only empty sea. Whether it was the same group or a different one remained unclear. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, with the loyalists always one step ahead. Months slid by in this tense pattern. Small infiltration attempts, swiftly dealt with by vigilant patrols, occasional sightings of unknown ships. Letters flew back and forth with King's Landing. Slowly, the Crown began mustering more support, securing alliances with the Reach, the Vale, and even talk of sending ambassadors to Dorne. But the realm was not keen to fling itself into a new war unless absolutely necessary. Many lords remembered how such wars drained coffers and cost lives. Through it all, House Baratheon Stark endured. The people of the Stormlands recognized that their lord and his Stark counterpart took the threat seriously and worked tirelessly to keep them safe. Trade was inconvenienced but not crippled. Crops were planted and harvested, villages repaired. Jon saw to it that roads remained patrolled and banditry was kept low. Gendry balanced the day-to-day demands of governance with the constant threat of foreign incursion. Despite the endless tension, a certain camaraderie grew among their forces. The men who patrolled the coasts came to share a sense of purpose, forging bonds as strong as the steel they carried. Where once Stormlander knights might have grumbled about northerners in their ranks, now they rode side by side, proud to be part of something bigger than old feuds. Riella, though she had no official title, became a figure of cautious respect among them. Her knowledge of Essos and her willingness to risk her life for Westeros' safety won them over. Still, no large-scale invasion arrived. Some nights, Jon dared hope that the Loyalists had decided to abandon their plans. Yet the prisoner in the cell, who occasionally spat out fresh taunts, insisted that the true dragon would come in time. The Knight of Woe had vanished entirely, leaving only rumors in his wake. One chilly autumn evening, as the sun sank behind the fortress walls, a sudden horn blast startled the courtyard. Jon and Gendry rushed out from the keep to see a group of riders galloping in, each bearing the heraldry of the crown, a raven in flight. The men dismounted, breath steaming in the cool air. One approached Jon with a sealed letter. From the king's hand, my lord. Urgent. Jon broke the seal, scanning the contents by torchlight. His jaw tightened. They have fresh intelligence from across the narrow sea. Ships are gathering in lists, a fleet, possibly a sail company. They might set sail before the winter storms pick up, likely heading for our shores. Gendry exhaled sharply. So it's finally happening. Jon looked up, heart pounding. Tyrion says Davos is returning with a small squadron from the Iron Islands. We'll have partial naval support. The king can't spare a huge army right now, but he's sending troops from the Crownlands and the Stormlands neighboring regions. They'll gather under our banner here, at Storm's End, to make a stand if the invasion comes to pass. A thrill of alarm and resolve rippled through the courtyard. Knights and servants who overheard hurried to pass the word. The tension that had simmered for months now threatened to boil over. House Baratheon Stark would find itself at the center of a new conflict, one that might reshape Westeros if they failed. That night, the fortress was a hive of activity. Gendry summoned his banner lords, briefing them on the king's letter. Ravens flew out again, instructing all coastal watchtowers to remain on high alert. The war drums, metaphorically, began to pound. Squires hammered out final repairs on armor, blacksmiths stoked their forges. Provisions were counted and recounted. The entire region braced for an onslaught that might arrive in weeks or even days, depending on the winds. Jon stood with Gendry, Riella, and a few key knights in the map room, candle wax dripping on parchment. They traced possible routes the fleet could take, potential landing sites. Riella pointed out spots the Loyalists might view as vulnerable. With each marker placed on the map, the magnitude of their challenge loomed larger. They were about to face Selzward's men who fought for coin, not for love of any cause. That made them unpredictable, but also perhaps lacking in unwavering loyalty. Days turned into a flurry of preparations. Men from nearby lordships began arriving in modest numbers, camping outside Storm's End or crowding into its courtyards. Some were hardened veterans of the last wars, others were green youths who had never seen a true battle. They wore the sigils of Hawk, Boar, Sunburst, Oakleaf, smaller Stormland houses uniting under Gendry's banner. A smattering of Crownland troops arrived as well, having traveled by land from King's Landing. King Bran remained in the capital, orchestrating the realm's broader defense. The plan was that if Lys's fleet arrived in the Stormlands, House Baratheon Stark would hold the line until reinforcements could converge. One crisp afternoon, as a gentle wind rolled across the courtyard, a small group of ships was spotted on the horizon. But this time they bore the banners of the Iron Islands. Leading them was the familiar figure of Lord Davos Seaworth, though not an Ironborn by birth. He had apparently brokered an alliance with Yara's forces. The galleys docked at a nearby harbor under Gendry's domain, and Davos himself rode up to Storm's End with a retinue of Ironborn sailors and a handful of crown knights. Gendry and Jon greeted him at the gate. Though older, Davos's eyes still shone with pragmatic intelligence. "I've brought what ships we can muster," he said, dismounting stiffly. "Not as many as I'd like, but enough to patrol the waters for any sign of the Lysine fleet. Yara Greyjoy sends her regards. She'll keep more ships in reserve, in case we need them." Jon clasped his hand. "Thank you, Davos. We feared we might stand alone at sea." Davos offered a grim smile. "You still might if they come in great numbers, but we'll do our part. I've seen enough war to know we need to stop it before it lands on our doorstep." His expression darkened. "Word in the Free Cities is that some wealthy benefactors are pouring gold into this Targaryen revival. We can't let them spark another round of madness." That evening, a council was held in Storm's End's Great Hall. The high table was cleared of finery and replaced with a large map. Torches hissed in their sconces. Around the map stood Jon, Gendry, Davos, Riella, Ser Colston, Ser Jobel, and a handful of other key leaders, including an Ironborn captain with scars etched across her forearms. The mood was somber, unified. Davos pointed to the stretch of sea off the Stormlands. "My ships can patrol here, near the main approaches. If the fleet from Lys tries to slip past, we'll signal you. But if they outnumber us greatly, we'll have to retreat. Yara can't commit her entire strength. She's dealing with her own troubles in the Iron Islands." Gendry drummed his fingers on the table. "We'll have watchers posted along the coast. If you spot them, you'll send ravens or lighting signals." Davos nodded. "We'll do what we can. Once we confirm the Lysine approach, we'll need you to muster any forces ready to fight on the beaches or near the harbors. We can't allow them to form up inland." Riella crossed her arms. "If they land in large numbers, they may try to proclaim the so-called True Dragon. That's when local malcontents might rally. We must show unwavering force from the start." Jon studied the map, recalling every skirmish they had fought so far. "And if the Knight of Woe appears in command?" A hush fell. Davos pursed his lips. "Then we face him as we would any foe. But if his reputation precedes him, we must expect he'll try to demoralize our men, possibly by killing key figures in single combat or displaying unstoppable skill. We can't let fear take root." Jon remembered the skill that Knight had shown in the tourney and the rumors from the infiltration squads. "I'll face him if needed," he said quietly. "We can't let him spread panic. But let's not go searching for single combat if it's avoidable." At that, the others nodded. Their plan took shape: watch the sea vigilantly, rally if the fleet approached, deny them any chance of landing uncontested. If they forced a landing, meet them with archers, cavalry, and coordinated strikes. House Baratheon Stark would stand as the realm's bulwark at least until more support from the crown or other lords arrived. Days bled into weeks. The early chills of winter began creeping in. Men huddled under thicker cloaks, and the swirl of sea wind carried an extra bite. Each sunrise found Davos's ships scanning the horizon. Each sunset brought renewed tension. Word arrived that the Vale and the Reach might send small detachments, but nobody was sure how quickly. The realm was vast, its resources scattered. Then, on a brisk morning with clouds scudding across a pale sky, a horn blast echoed over the waves. One of Davos's ships sent up a flare of bright green smoke. Watchers along the coast scrambled to respond, lighting signal fires. In the courtyard of Storm's End, Jon and Gendry were already assembling knights when a breathless messenger confirmed the news. A large fleet had been spotted, bearing dark sails, approaching from the southeast. The Lysine force, it seemed, had finally arrived. Panic threatened to surge, but the disciplined knights and soldiers remembered their drills. Gendry's voice boomed across the yard, rallying the men, calling them to form ranks. Jon prepared to move out with the forward columns, ghost snapping at the air as if sensing the coming battle. Riella stood by, her face pale but resolute, sword at her hip. Within the hour, a sizable contingent of cavalry and foot soldiers poured out from Storm's End's gates, heading toward the designated vantage points near the coastline. War banners fluttered in the wind, the direwolf and stag of Baratheon Stark, the crowned stag of older Baratheon line, and smaller sigils from local houses. Overhead, the sky hung low and gray as though matching the grim determination below. As they drew near the coast, they caught glimpses of Davos's ships already engaged in a distant clash. Smoke rose from at least one vessel. The Lysine fleet looked larger than anything the Watchers had seen before, over a dozen war galleys plus smaller transports. Jon's heart clenched. They were outnumbered at sea, but hopefully Davos could delay them long enough for the Stormlanders to set an ambush on land. Scouts raced ahead, confirming the direction of the enemy's approach. Gendry led the cavalry to form up behind a ridge that overlooked a wide beach. Jon positioned archers on either side, using the natural slopes for cover. They worked swiftly, yet the sense of time crawling was agonizing. Beyond the ridge, the surf roared and shapes on the water drifted closer. Then came the moment of truth. Black-sailed galleys emerged from the haze, dropping anchors or gliding into shallower water. Rowboats started ferrying men ashore. Through a spyglass, Jon watched hundreds of armed figures disembarking. Many wore the mismatched armor of Sellswords, but a few had more elaborate gear, reminiscent of Essos's free companies. The clink of steel drifted on the wind. The hush before the storm. Gendry signaled the archers. The first wave of Lysine invaders stepped onto the sand, forming ranks. An officer barked commands. Others dragged crates of supplies from the rowboats. Their posture suggested they expected resistance, but perhaps not the immediate onslaught about to be unleashed. Jon watched from his vantage. The enemy had enough men to form a credible beachhead if left unchallenged. He glanced at Gendry, who stood nearby, hammer in hand. They shared a nod, remembering their vow to defend the realm from any who would reignite the cycle of war. Jon raised his arm to signal the archers. A hush, a breath. Then, with a swift downward slash of his hand, the horns blared. Arrows rained from either side, black shafts cutting the sky. Shouts of alarm erupted among the invading force. Men scrambled to lift shields. Some fell, pierced by the volley. Yet more rowboats kept coming, bearing new waves. The Sellswords pushed forward, returning fire with crossbows, though fewer in number. Gendry led the cavalry around the ridge, charging down onto the beach with a thunder of hooves. Jon was among them, longclaw gleaming. The shock of the charge broke the first line of Lysine fighters, scattering them across the wet sand. Sellswords reeled, some dropping pikes, others trampled under the horses. The sea wind whipped at cloaks and mainies, salt spray mixing with the metallic tang of blood. A savage melee erupted. Jon reined in his mount, parried a blade aimed at his chest, and struck back, sending a Sellsword sprawling. Ghost darted among the chaos, harrying enemies who tried to flank the cavalry. Gendry swung his hammer in powerful arcs, each blow caving armor or snapping bones, reminiscent of Robert Baratheon's own fierce style. The men behind them fought bravely, crying out stag and wolf, the rallying call of Baratheon Stark. But the invaders kept coming. More rowboats landed, disgorging contingents of disciplined foot soldiers. Their officers shouted commands in an Essosi tongue, forming a wedge that pressed into the cavalry's flank. For a moment, the defenders risked being enveloped. Jon called for a retreat to the higher ground, luring the Sellswords into the archers' field of fire. Another wave of arrows whistled overhead, cutting down pursuers. Over the crashing surf and screams of the wounded, Jon heard horns from the sea. Two of Davos's ships approached in a bold move, launching flaming pitch at the Lysine galleys anchored nearest shore. Fire sprang up on the decks, sending plumes of black smoke swirling. Sellswords on the beach turned, startled, some shouting in alarm. Seizing the moment, Gendry roared a charge once more, and the defenders surged forward. The beach churned with bodies, foam stained red. The clash of steel was deafening. In the midst of it all, Jon glimpsed a figure in black armor stepping from one of the rowboats, tall, imposing, a cloth covering his face below the visor. A sword at his side seemed to reflect no light, like a shard of obsidian. Jon's breath caught. The Knight of Woe had arrived. Their eyes locked across the chaos, as though each recognized the other in an instant. The Black Knight gestured to some of his men, who formed a protective ring around him. Then he advanced with measured steps, cutting down a Stormlander soldier who rushed him too hastily. Each motion was swift, precise, uncanny. A ripple of fear spread through the defenders who recognized him from rumors or the tourney's stories. Jon pushed his horse forward, ignoring a slash from another Sellsword. Ghost bounded behind him, teeth bared. Gendry, seeing the Knight of Woe, shouted Jon's name, but Jon felt the pull of an inevitable confrontation. The Knight of Woe strode calmly as though the raging battle around him was mere backdrop. They closed in on each other, separated by a ring of swirling combat. A Stormlander knight tried to intervene, jabbing a spear at the Black Knight, who sidestepped and cut the man's hamstring with a deft slash. The knight collapsed, screaming. Jon dismounted, not wanting to be at a disadvantage on horseback against so deft a foe. Ghost snarled, hackles raised. The Knight of Woe paused, lifting his sword in salute, a mockery of chivalry. Then he lunged at Jon with terrifying speed. Jon barely raised Longclaw in time to deflect the blow. The impact vibrated up his arms. Sparks flew where Valyrian steel met the strange black blade. A jolt of memory tugged at Jon Arthur Dayne's fabled Dawn, or something akin to it. Yet this sword felt different, menacing. They traded strikes. The Knight of Woe's technique was honed with an economy of motion that wasted no breath. Jon parried, weaving aside a thrust aimed at his ribs. He countered with a diagonal slash, which the knight evaded with a pivot. Their blades clashed repeatedly, resonating in the salt air. Around them, the battle raged, but it seemed distant, as though they fought in their own enclosed arena. Ghost circled, looking for an opening, but the Black Knight was too quick. Each time Ghost tried to snap at him, the knight flicked his blade or shifted position. Jon pressed the attack, feinting high then swinging low. For a moment, he thought he had the advantage, but the Knight of Woe twisted his wrist, redirecting Jon's blow with startling ease. A boot lashed out, slamming into Jon's thigh and driving him back a step. Pain flared, but Jon steadied himself. He could feel sweat trickling under his armor. The Knight of Woe advanced again, relentless. They exchanged half a dozen more strikes. Each time, Jon realized he was facing an opponent whose skill rivaled the finest knights he'd ever encountered, perhaps even Brienne or the greatest swordsman of the King's Guard. If he faltered for a single moment, it would cost him his life. A sudden bark from Ghost gave Jon an opening. The direwolf lunged, forcing the Knight of Woe to divert his sword arm to ward off the snapping jaws. Jon seized the heartbeat to strike. Longclaw scored a glancing blow across the knight's shoulder plate, chipping some of the black enamel. A grunt of pain echoed from within the visor. But the knight retaliated in a flash, smashing the hilt of his sword into Ghost's snout, knocking the dire wolf aside with a yelp. Jon roared in fury, slashing again. The Knight of Woe stepped into the blow, meeting Longclaw with his blade, forcing the two swords into a lock. Jon's muscles strained as he tried to overpower his foe. For a second, their faces were inches apart, Jon's eyes staring into the dark slit of the visor. He glimpsed a reflection of himself in the black steel, along with the swirl of the battlefield. Then the knight pivoted, using Jon's momentum to unbalance him, and slammed an elbow into Jon's chest. Air rushed from Jon's lungs. He staggered, ears ringing. The Black Knight followed up with a slash aimed at Jon's side, but Jon twisted, partially deflecting it. Pain lanced his rib cage, blood seeped from a shallow gash. Gritting his teeth, Jon backed away, trying to regain composure. Some of the Lysine Cell's words surged forward to protect their champion, but they were intercepted by Gendry and a handful of Stormlanders who had seen Jon in peril. Gendry's hammer crashed into one Sellsword's shield, splintering it. The man toppled with a cry. Another tried to stab at Gendry's flank, but a Stormlander spear took him through the throat. In the swirl, Gendry saw Jon's predicament. Jon coughed, swallowing the copper tang of blood, and raised Longclaw. The Knight of Woe measured him, likely sensing the advantage. Ghost was still dazed from the blow. Before the knight could close in, Gendry barreled in from the side, aiming a crushing strike at the Black Knight's head. The Knight of Woe dodged at the last instant, forced to shift focus. Gendry hammered down again, but the knight parried, staggering slightly under the force. One of Gendry's Stormlander knights tried to flank him, thrusting with a halberd. In response, the Knight of Woe spun, slashing across the halberd's shaft. The steel bit deep, severing the weapon. The halberd bearer froze in shock. The knight thrust forward, running the man through. Gendry cursed, hooking his warhammer under the knight's blade to push it aside. Jon used the moment to regroup, ignoring the ache in his ribs. He limped a few steps closer, staying behind the Knight of Woe's field of vision. The Black Knight extricated his blade from the Stormlander's corpse, black steel dripping red. He turned in a tight circle, realizing he was surrounded by Jon, Gendry, and two more loyal knights. Ghost crouched nearby, snarling. For the first time, hesitation flickered in the Knight of Woe's stance. With the combined threat pressing him, he might not escape unscathed. Outside this ring, the beach battle still raged, but it looked like the defenders were gaining ground, pushing the Lysine Cell's words back to the surf. Smoke from burning ships stained the sky. The Knight of Woe let out a muffled growl. Then, with a sweeping slash, he forced the nearest Stormlander knight to leap back. He spun, delivering a fierce thrust at Gendry's torso. Gendry parried, though the impact rattled him. Seeing an opening, Jon lunged in from behind, aiming a killing blow at the knight's back. But the Black Knight angled his body just enough that Jon's strike cut only empty air. In a blur of motion, the Knight of Woe used the momentum to vault past Gendry, slipping between the two loyal knights with surprising agility. He broke free of the circle, sprinting toward the rowboats. A few Sellswords tried to follow, but most were in full retreat, scrambled by the Stormlanders' relentless assault. Gendry roared for archers to shoot him down. Arrows streaked across the beach. 2 pinged off the knight's armor, but he dodged the rest, diving behind drifting debris. Jon and Gendry dashed after him, but the Knight of Woe leapt onto a half-burned rowboat, pushing it into the surf. A few loyalists in the shallows gave him covering fire with crossbows, forcing the Stormlanders to duck behind wreckage. Jon tried to wade into the waves, but the water was waist-deep and crossbow bolts kicked up spumes around him. The Knight of Woe, shielded by the boat's hull, rowed frantically toward one of the remaining Lysine ships, which was already starting to weigh anchor and turn seaward. Desperate, Jon raised his sword, but he couldn't close the distance in time. Gendry hurled his warhammer in anger, the heavy weapon tumbling end over end before splashing into the surf. The Knight of Woe never looked back, his visor fixed forward, black cloth fluttering in the wind. Soon, the boat merged with the ship's silhouette, and they drifted beyond arrow range. By then, the Lysine force on the beach had collapsed. Those not dead or captured were swimming madly for the anchored vessels, or else surrendering on their knees, arms raised. Davos's ships had set 2 of the enemy galleys ablaze, while the rest, including the Knight of Woe's probable ship, began to withdraw, sacrificing the men ashore. Jon sloshed back onto the beach, drenched in salt water, chest heaving. His side burned from the shallow wound, and his arms trembled with adrenaline. Gendry came to stand beside him, eyes still locked on the horizon. "He got away," Gendry muttered, voice thick with frustration. Jon nodded, struggling to find words. The beach was a scene of carnage, the tide lapping at bodies and broken weapons. Smoke curled from scattered debris. Cries of the wounded mingled with the crackle of dying flames. But the day was theirs, at least for now. The main Lysine invasion had been repelled. Scores of Sellswords lay dead, and their ships were retreating, battered. House Baratheon Stark had held the line. Yet the Knight of Woe had escaped, along with the promise of another attempt at conquest. The true dragon rumor still loomed. Jon closed his eyes, tasting blood on his lip. They had won a battle, but not the war. The vow stood firm. Protect the realm, stand against tyranny, whether Targaryen or otherwise. The cost was steep, the peace fragile. But Jon Snow and Gendry Baratheon had shown that the unity they forged was real, not easily broken by old illusions of destiny. As the sun broke through the smoky haze, casting a pale light over the battlefield, Jon felt a surge of grim resolve. So long as House Baratheon Stark stood together, they would not yield to those who would drag the realm back into fire and blood. The Knight of Woe might return, some heir might yet emerge, but they would face a realm awakened to the price of blind ambition. Jon lifted Longclaw, letting the sea spray wash its blood-stained steel. In that moment, battered and bleeding as he was, he still believed they could break this new threat before it devoured Westeros in another storm of madness. Gendry clapped a hand on Jon's shoulder, steadying him. Together, they surveyed the wreckage and the weary men, mindful that more trials lay ahead. But this day belonged to House Baratheon Stark, a testament that unity could triumph, that hearts once shaped by war could forge a better future. A future worth fighting for, no matter how many times old ghosts came calling.